Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I sell guns on the dark web. Now, it's my turn to be afraid. Story by you/Monsters in My Mind. What happened to me isn't going to pull on any heartstrings, I'm sure. I'll admit it right now. I'm a bad guy, a low-life sleazebag that made my money outside of the law. I'm here so others can point their finger at me and say, "At least I'm not like him." That's been my role in society, and I've come to terms with it. But I am still a human being, and I still have feelings and rights. So, what happened to me shouldn't ever happen to anyone, period. So like I said, I'm an outlaw. I sell pharmaceuticals to let people forget their problems for a while. A downside is that the government has been taking over my job lately, what with marijuana being legalized and all that. Customers are moving forward to easier to get and no jail time providing kicks. It's been a rough go for me economically, and I had to diversify my portfolio, so to speak, and turn to gun running on the dark web. Now, there's a revenue stream that won't dry up soon. Unmarked handguns and fully automatic weapons with no wait period or background check appeal to a lot of different clientele. I don't know where they go or who is buying them for what purpose. I am not the morality police. I'm just a guy trying to make a buck. Enough of that though. Let's cut to the chase. I got a story to tell, and you got time to listen. It all started a few weeks ago. Business had been booming lately, what with all the riots both sides want to be armed. My usual base of gangs, mafia, and various criminals, and not to mention, the whole quarantine. Toilet paper isn't the only thing being stockpiled, I guess. The point that I'm trying to make is that I had so much business that I couldn't keep track of all of it, or anything else for that matter. So when earlier this year, a news report came on about the little kid being caught in the crossfire of some baddies, and that the police had traced the weapons being used to have been sold off from the dark web, it never even registered on my radar. 4 Sundays ago, I had just gotten off the phone with my grandmother. She wasn't doing too well, but I promised her that the payment for her treatment was in the mail when I got an email from a client, a small-time gang called Sun Yi On. If that doesn't ring a bell, then the Triad. If you still don't know what I'm talking about, you don't know the underworld. Try to Google it. They were asking why they got 112-inch black dildos instead of the AK-47s that they had ordered. Let me tell you, they did not find this funny at all. After that, the emails came pouring in and threats were made on my life, ranging from big-time gangs to local bubbas wondering where their Bambi Killer 3000 was. I spent all of my Monday reaching out to my contacts and asking what had happened. None of them knew. According to them, the shipments went out as ordered. I had to hire a hacker to get into the UPS system, only to find out that the orders had been rerouted to the police organizations, and then other orders were sent out in their place. Holy hell, my life is ruined, I said to myself, head in hands, as I tried to puzzle together what had actually happened. Reality hadn't even set in yet when a voice came through the speakers on my computer. "Having a bad day, are we?" it said. "Funny how these things happen out of nowhere and blindside you." I looked up and noticed that the light was on, indicating that my webcam was also active. When you've been on the dark web as long as I have, you know the risk you run of being hacked. I thought that I had set up enough protection, But there is always someone out there that can get around it, I suppose. Unfazed by this, given my recent circumstances, I sat there and gave the camera a middle finger. I wouldn't have taken you as the stoic type, especially after your reputation is in ruins and your life may now be at stake. Pissed off some high-level buyers, haven't you? They might just come to collect your ass for the goods they didn't get. Piss off! Wait, it was you, wasn't it? I said, bolting upright. Initially, this was an annoyance. Now, this voice had my attention. What I may or may not have done should be your least concern. You should be worried about the 4 Triad members coming around the corner down the street right now, the voice said. My computer screen switched to a CCTV camera down my street. I think it was from an ATM and showed a group of burly Chinese men coming down the road. I could tell it was by my place from the little bakery across the way from the camera. At first, I rushed to grab my things and head out. But then it hit me. Why would this voice ruin my life and then help me escape by warning me someone was after me? Inches from the door, I stopped as I mulled this over. Moments later, there was a knock on my apartment. Through the peephole, I saw the same 4 men that had minutes ago been down the street. Vibrations went off in my pocket and I reached in to grab my phone. Don't talk, just listen. I know a safe place for you to go. Head out the back window and down the fire escape. I'll tell you where to go after that. The same voice from my computer speakers told me through my phone. I didn't have a second to think about what was happening and followed what he told me to do. Down the rusty ladder and into the dirty alleyway I went, and as soon as I hit the ground, a lookout on the street spotted me. He yelled up to his companions, then gave chase. Take the next left, then cross the street and go down the alley on the other side, he said. Gunshots rang out from behind and a bullet whizzed by my head. Hurry up, you're almost there. I can't hold the light much longer, the voice told me. There was no traffic on the street, so I was able to cross easily. The men were about 10 feet behind me, and as soon as I was on the other side, the stoplight turned green and the road that I had just crossed became busy. One of the men seemed to think he could follow after me and the cars would stop for him. He was mistaken and got hit by one. This caused a huge jam and the other men were forced to abandon their chase to tend to their now unconscious associate. Keep going down the alley, then take a left and go into the building there. I did as I was told, and once I turned the corner, ran into the door on my left and slammed it with relief. The room was large and dark, save for the flicker of a computer screen in the middle. There wasn't much that I could make out, but the space was seemingly empty. From the white light, I could tell that the wall to my right was covered in a foam latex texturing. My phone hung up, and there was a soft click of a lock from the door behind me. Hey, you can't lock me in here, I yelled. What the hell do you think you're doing? I demanded as I made my way to the computer. How did the Triad get my address? And who the hell are you? Why would you save me after ruining my life? I'm the guy who gave the Triad your address. That's who I am, the voice said from the computer. I'd save you after ruining your life because revenge is a dish best served cold. The temperature in the room immediately began to drop, and within minutes, my breath was frosty as I huddled on the floor in a feeble attempt to stay warm. It was then that I realized I was in some kind of warehouse, and the foam latex was insulation. Breath became labored, and my eyes wouldn't focus. I tried to talk, but all that came out was gibberish. Heavy eyelids finally refused to open as I sank into a blackness that I have never experienced before. "Get up! I'm not done with you yet," the voice said. My head pounded like a bass drum, dull and achy. Lights were now on in the warehouse. The place was even bigger than I had originally thought. Not just a freezer like I had figured. It took up about half the city block and was wall-to-wall white. There was a door opposite of the one that I entered, and one on each of the other walls as well. Throbbing pain coursed through my right hand, and looking down, I was shocked to realize that my middle finger had been cut off clean. "What the hell? My finger! You took my finger!" Hurts when something is taken from you suddenly, doesn't it? Here are my rules. Listen up. You don't touch the computer, or you die. You do what you're told, or you die. Don't try to escape, or you die. That's it. Pretty simple. For the next 24 hours, I own you. Now, come here. I got something I want to show you. Still too weak to stand, I crawled over to the screen like an animal. Pain blinded me every time my hand hit the floor. At least, the bleeding had stopped already. Pictures of guns shown on the screen, 3 pistols and an automatic rifle. "Do these look familiar to you?" the man asked. "No, should they?" "You sold them earlier this year. They were used in a shooting that killed 2 drug dealers and an innocent child." "Look, I only facilitate the sales. I don't actually handle the product. I'm more of a middleman. What these people want them for and why they use them is not my concern. I'm only trying to make a buck." "Then get a job and contribute to society like a normal person. You sad excuse for a human being." "Jobs nowadays barely cover the bills, let alone pay for a grandmother's cancer treatment." "Go cry to a shrink. Point is that these weapons are now being kept at the police station in the evidence locker. I want you to go get them." "I can't do that. I'm a mid-level gun runner. I can't get around the security or pass myself off as an officer to get in there. I need a uniform, a badge, key cards. It's undoable for me." "I think now would be a good time to take a hard look into your stumpy finger." I brought my hand up and looked deep into the wound. Underneath all the blood clots and pulp, I could clearly make out a silver-looking metal. "That container has potassium cyanide in it. If you don't do as you're told, it injects you with a lethal dose. I have the button here in my hand." Pictures of me started to flash across the screen. They were of me at the grocery store, the gas station, and even taking a walk near my apartment. "I can see you anywhere in the city. Stray off course, and you're dead. There is an earpiece in the basket by the door. Connect your phone to it via Bluetooth and listen to my instructions. If you do what I say, you'll be fine." I went to the door and found everything as he said I would. I connected the earpiece to my phone and then put it in my ear. It was pretty small and most likely wouldn't be noticeable by others. There was also a police uniform in the basket, which I put on as well. He then told me which station to go to and that there was a car waiting for me outside. The door opened with a click. Outside was fully marked police car, gassed and ready to go. Whoever this guy was, he had connections that I had never seen before. It was a nerve-wracking 30-minute drive to my destination. My hand hurt like hell the whole time. a constant reminder of the power that this person now had over me. So, you need these guns back so you don't get in trouble? If that's the case, why didn't you send one of your people to do it? No reason to torture and harass me like this. I'm just saying, you seem to have connections and incredible hacking skills. No need for all this violence, I said. Turn left here, he replied, and I drove the rest of the way in silence, save for when he told me directions. Finally, I got to the station. Was a little worried my hand would draw suspicion, so I slipped it into my pocket. The added pressure from the pans caused the capsule to shift, and I was worried that it might go off accidentally. Then, I would hit the floor dead in the middle of a cop shop surrounded by officers. Wouldn't that make for a crazy news story at 6? The evidence locker is in the basement. Cell reception will cut out there. You got 15 minutes to get the guns and get out, or I inject the cyanide. I don't want you turning yourself in or something. Everything you need to get the guns is in your left back pocket, and I've already submitted all the necessary paperwork in the computer. The man said, and then he was gone. I got down to the basement no problem, flashed my badge and asked to be let in. Everything was going smooth. I went into the back and put the 3 guns into the evidence bags, then started to walk out. Hey, you gotta sign those out. You can't just walk out of here with them, the clerk behind the desk said. Oh, yeah, a long day. Must have forgotten, I replied, gave the man my badge number, and signed some paperwork. I thought this case was closed already. Why do they want to look at the evidence again? The clerk asked. I stumbled for a minute, then came up with something. New evidence in the case. The DA wants to look at some stuff. They might reopen it, I said, hoping that any of that made sense. Ah, okay, you must be from uptown. The paperwork is all in order, but I'll need a detective to sign off on this first. The clerk got up and went in back. I could see him through some glass talking to a man in a suit. He looked at me, then the other man looked at me. Then the clerk pointed to me. I don't know what they were saying, but the detective looked suspicious. 14 minutes had already passed, and I didn't have time to wait. Without thinking, I grabbed the bags that held the guns through the slot of the plexiglass divider and then ran. I could hear the office doors fly open as the clerk and the detective gave chase. It didn't even matter if they even caught me. If I didn't get out there in a minute, I was a dead man anyways. I took the stairs and ran as fast as I could. My heart was beating out of my chest as I burst through the doors on the first floor. My pursuers followed right behind me. They were yelling and screaming for someone to stop me. One big burly cop stepped out in front of me right before the main doors, and I put my shoulder down like I was going to plow into him, but then took a step left then right. He lunged at me, but I narrowly avoided it, and I was out in the parking lot. Shots rang out as I sprinted to my cruiser and got in. The back window was shattered as it was hit by a bullet, but I managed to turn the key and then get out of there. Ear-splitting sirens filled the air as a whole slew of cop cars gave chase. Did you get the guns? The voice said over my earpiece. Yes, you asshole! You set me up! I didn't know you would mess up this bad. I'll take care of it. You just get out of their sight. I managed to take a few sharp corners and lose them for a second. Then, I heard my mystery man's voice come across the scanner. He was giving them false directions on which way I was going, leading them away from me. He then told me where to ditch the car that I was in, and that a new vehicle would be waiting for me there, along with a change of clothes. I again did what he said, and I got into an old Ford Pinto, and then changed my clothes. It was about 20 minutes to get back to the warehouse. The lights were off again, and the computer was the only thing visible. "Put the guns in the back and then come back over to the computer," I was told. I went in and did it, and as I approached, I noticed on the screen there was a picture of a young boy. "I'm not gonna do any kidnapping or off a child. You can just kill me right now," I told him. "No, you won't. You already have. Kneel down and take a close look at this picture. Surely, you recognize this one. He was all over the news a while back." "I don't know what you mean. I've never killed a kid before in my life," I said, while getting down to look. "Not directly, you haven't, but let me tell you about this one. He was 9 years old and had just gotten his new shiny bike that he had always wanted. He asked his dad if he could go for a ride, and his dad said yes. What kind of world do we live in when a kid can't even ride his own bike? He was only a few blocks from his house when gunfire filled the street. There were some drug dealers on that block, and it was drive-by. Do you know where these people got their guns from?" "Let me take a wild guess. Me," I responded. "Do you know which guns they were?" a voice said from behind me. The touch of cold steel pressed against the back of my head. "You killed my son when you sold those men these guns, the same ones that I had you retrieve for me." Whoever this man was, he was now right behind me, and from the sound of it, he eagerly anticipated my demise. "All right, man. If you're going to do it, then do it. Know, however, that I only do this to help my grandma. She'd be dead if it wasn't for me. She's old, has already lived her life. My son had his whole life ahead of him, and you stole that. The ends don't justify the means." A sharp crack rang in my head when he hit me with the butt of the gun. I was on my back, looking up. Tears welled in my eyes from the pain. He pointed the gun right at my face and pulled the trigger. I flinched in anticipation for my final moments. Click. The gun was empty. "Death is too good for you. I will never bring my boy back. You're gonna live your life in fear from now on. One day, or maybe never, you may experience the most horrific and painful death ever dreamed of. Inside of you is another capsule, a different capsule that won't be detected by any medical procedure or scan. If I ever feel the need to release it, you will have a slow, painful, and unstoppable death. You'll have to wait and see if that day ever comes." He then threw the gun into my face and then busted my nose. His footsteps trailed off as he walked out the door, and the temperature began to drop, and the faint sounds of police sirens echoed in the distance before I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in the hospital being treated for hypothermia. The police linked me to the evidence room robbery, and I'm now serving 20 years in the state pen. My hand throbs every time there is a change in the weather, and I don't sleep much anymore, always wondering if this day will be my last. The 5 True Red Rooms on the Dark Web. Written by a known writer 00 or Raven Blackhurst. I work for a huge company that helps bring down bad websites on the web. I can't reveal the name here, but I have been doing this for many years now. A few years ago, I discovered a group of red rooms called the 5 True Red Rooms on the deep web. Now, don't go lurking around trying to find them because you won't. A true red room cannot be accessed through Tor. If you try, you will just set yourself up for getting a shitty virus on your computer. I have been told that they are scams, but rest assured, a few of them are not. It is very hard for an individual who doesn't understand the concept of the 5 True Red Rooms to try and break in. Let's just say you have to know someone that runs one of them. It can't be accessed through Tor. You have to know someone or be lucky enough to get a passcode to get into them. You have to be proven trustworthy. And in this case, I gained the trust of someone who helped moderate one. The True Red Rooms are a series of 5 rooms, sort of like doors. If you can gain access to the first red room, you pay Bitcoin and show that you are serious. Then, you may get permission to access the second red room, and so on. What do you see in these evil live streams? Well, I'll tell you. Here is the first true red room. I clicked on the first screen, and a black box appeared asking for my passcode. I had typed it in, and it was 4 numbers, a dash, and my username given to access that site. Permission granted, it said, and I was in. I thought it was too easy. On the first page was a bunch of black video boxes with titles. Some of them were videos titled, "Watch Me Scare Kara," or "Tiffany Gets Spooked." And I clicked on the "Watch Me Scare Kara" first. A man with what seemed to be a cell phone camera is pointing it towards the front door. He is inside a home, and it looks like he is hiding behind a door, and I can see the living room furniture. A nice leather love seat and bookshelves are in the room. He is whispering in a foreign language that I cannot understand. He never shows his face. But then suddenly, the doorknob is turning, and I hear keys rattling. A girl in a green nurse's uniform with blonde hair and a tan comes in. She's petite looking, and she's probably in her 20s. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice scream, "Don't move!" And she freezes like a deer in headlights, and then screams and drops her keys. A man in all black and a black ski mask is running towards her with a giant hammer. Her arms go up and she screams to block him, and he smacks her in the head twice with a hammer. She falls to the ground, and red blood pools up on the white carpet, and she is completely knocked out. The man points to the man who is hiding behind the door and says what sounds like the words, "Done," and then both cameras are shut off. If this was real, it was the most disturbing thing that I have ever seen. It did not look fake at all, and I didn't want to know what happened next. I could only imagine. I didn't even want to click on the second video, but I did. The next video, "Tiffany Gets Spooked," was even worse. This time, the camera is zoomed in on what looks to be a park. A woman with brown hair and blue jogging suit is running laps around a track. The foreign-sounding guy is sitting in what appears to be his car, and I can see the cracked windshield. He is wearing black gloves, but never shows his face. He is laughing and talking a little, and the girl is still jogging. I wanted to yell to the poor girl, "Run away! Get out of that park! You're being stalked!" But I realized that there was nothing that I could do, and she wouldn't be able to hear me anyway. Suddenly, the camera shuts off, and I think the video is over. Well, I was wrong. Very wrong. The video comes back on in what looks like night vision. It is green and a little choppy, and I can see what looks like a bunch of pine trees around. Then, I see what the camera is focusing on. A girl is in what looks like a trunk, and she is trying to scream. Her legs and arms are tied and bound, and her mouth has a gag in it. It looks like the same girl from earlier in the blue jogging suit. And now, she is barefoot. I can only see black gloves and a hairy-looking man. It looks like the same guy from the earlier video. He is in all black and is smoothing her hair back, and the man holding the camera is telling her to calm down in English. She's crying. Then he begins to pull her body out of the trunk. Thunk. He bumps her head by accident on the trunk lid. I feel relieved, thinking it's all a joke and that she will be okay. But suddenly, I feel very sickened. I can't believe what they were going to do. The man in black with a black ski mask lays her on the ground, and she gives up crying and screaming at this point. The camera zooms in on her face. The lights go out in her eyes, and all I can see is darkness. This poor girl has lost all hope. I want to cry, and I fight back the tears. They began to tie her wrist to the bumper of the car. The cameraman is still there holding the camera, and the other man gets in the car. I hear the engine roar, and they were going to drag her behind it. The video then cuts off. I lost my family to the deep web. Story by you/Eric Alden. Allow me to just preface this by saying that I never used the deep web for anything too bad. I never bought drugs. I never stole movies or music. Hell, I rarely even looked at porn. I had the most generous wife you could ever imagine, and I honestly didn't need anything else with a woman like that in my life. I had always been fascinated by computers, but the town that I grew up in was a small hick town of that. I remember hearing about computers and the internet, and the idea of it blew me away. Being able to access information from anywhere in the world is amazing, and it astounded me that it wasn't embraced and pursued by more people. So, I not only lived in a technology desert, but my family wasn't exactly rich either. My mom slaved away at a large corporation where she was paid much less than she was worth. My dad worked various odd jobs, but always invested most of his time into the local church. He was a stereotypical Bible thumper, and as one might expect, I grew to resent the religion. I always felt like religion was a one-way street. They expected me to pray to and serve some deity in the sky, and all those who don't would burn in hell. My interest in history led me to the realization that every religion was similar in that regard, and that, for me, was enough to dismiss them all. Thankfully, they raised my sister and me to work hard. We both went to college and got decent jobs. She became a nurse and moved to New York, and I followed my passion for history and eventually became a world history teacher at a small high school. I married my high school sweetheart shortly after getting my teaching job, and we moved into a more populated suburb not too far from where I grew up. We found a nice house that was close enough to both of our jobs. My wife and I had been saving up money because we were trying to have a child, although it was taking longer than we thought. After about a year of trying, we saw a doctor. He said that we were both able and healthy, but it would take some more time. This was almost nice in a way because we had more money than we needed for when the baby came. I decided to take a few $100s and get that computer that I had been dreaming about for years. I was so excited when my wife agreed that I should. We couldn't raise a kid in this day and age without a computer after all, right? Well, I placed it in our home office, and I quickly became enamored with the thing. I can honestly say that my life would have been so much better if I had one of these growing up. I could literally learn anything in the world that I wanted. I found myself reading dozens of articles, speeches, books, and watching tutorials. I could not have been any happier. Time marched on and I found myself finishing up the semester and getting ready for the summer. It got pretty boring, honestly. I still got paid for it, but because the school was such a crappy district, there weren't many things for teachers to get involved in over the summer. That was when my genuine interest on the internet became something of an addiction. I was on that thing at nearly all hours of the day. Since my wife and I were still trying to have a baby, we were having sex like two animals. Life could not have gotten any better. Unfortunately, when things get that good, they can only get worse. It was a month and a half through the summer vacation when I found myself reading the same shit on the internet. There was nothing new, or at the very least nothing worth learning about. However, I did recall hearing about something strange. It was called the deep web. I never studied it in depth, but I eventually had a basic understanding of it. I downloaded Tor and started looking around online. I made sure to be extra careful because I have heard stories of people being stalked, kidnapped, or even killed for using the deep web. I found myself staring at dozens of random links on the hidden wiki at 3 o'clock in the morning. I kept clicking away until anything useful came up. And I did end up finding a lot of mathematics and science stuff. But I'm a history teacher. I would rather learn about history. A few more hours of searching, and I found something that at least remotely piqued my interest. It was a conspiracy theory page. Now, I don't consider myself to be anything of a conspiracy theorist, nor am I the least bit paranoid about things like the Illuminati. But these were some of the most solid arguments for foul play from the government that I had ever seen. There were classified documents, in-depth research, and an overwhelming amount of evidence for almost every theory that I saw. Don't get me wrong, there were a few that seemed a bit far-fetched, but the vast majority of them made some damn good arguments. Eventually, I couldn't hold my eyes open any longer and I had to go to bed. I powered down my computer, and as quiet as a mouse, I crawled into bed with my tender, loving wife. I felt a bit of a void between us though. She never had the lust for knowledge like I did, and if I were to ever tell her about the crazy and interesting things that I read online, she'd playfully tease me that she was falling asleep or something to that effect. The next day, I was right back on the deep web looking for new things to widen my worldview. Nearly an hour had gone by, and all I had found was a bunch of broken links. I was about to sign off when a box appeared in the corner of my screen with a link in it. Being as naive as I was, I clicked on it, and I was absolutely mortified at what I saw next. At first glance, I thought the abomination on my computer screen was some kind of a torture video. No, I was dead wrong. A toddler whimpered as he sat there gagged and bound, covered in blood and piss, and he begged the man in the frame to stop, but to no avail. A deranged man in a Guy Fawkes mask stared at the camera as he thrust his body to and fro. A few seconds went by when the man finished and he got up to do a strange dance. If there was a cross between a football player's victory dance and a circus clown's opening act, the resulting atrocity might resemble the strange act the man performed over that poor child. To my horror, I realized it was a live feed hooked up to a webcam with a live chat box on the side. It took a few minutes for the shocking realization to fully wash over me. After I'd collected myself, I foolishly started to read what was in the live chat box. The most horrid and disgusting things you can imagine were being requested. I had a hard time believing that real people were behind a keyboard somewhere in the world typing these things. I really don't want to go into too much detail about what they were saying, but it suddenly dawned on me that I could just close this shit and be over with it. I jolted the mouse and clicked to X out the page, but nothing happened. I felt my stomach drop. What the hell is going on? I kept asking myself. I'd never heard of anything like this happening. I was about to manually reboot my computer when the man from the video stream called out my full name. Leaving so soon, Mr. Edwards. Off to teach another history lesson at that little shithole you call a high school? He asked in a rough, distorted tone. I had no idea what to do. I clicked every button on the computer, keyboard and mouse, and no matter what I did, there was no reaction. I heard him start reading off my credit card information, and I had enough. I unplugged my computer from the back and powered it down, and it was a relief to have finally left that nightmare of a web page. I was in awe at the speed that he was able to get my personal information. I changed my credit card number and any other information that I could. My wife was a bit suspicious, but she didn't pry too much at it. We had a very trusting relationship, and I didn't want to frighten her, so I kept the incident to myself. A few days went by and I didn't even go into my office. I left my computer in there unplugged, admittedly scared to turn that damn thing on ever again. I knew that I'd have to eventually face my fear. So I entered the office. I booted her up, and everything seemed to be normal. I deleted Tor and made sure to be done with the deep web. I casually loaded up Google Chrome, and everything seemed to be perfectly fine. Nothing seemed to come to fruition from my little mishap, and I decided that I was going to be safe after all. Oh, how wrong I was. About 5 months later, my wife's sister ended up moving in. She really was such a pleasant woman, and we did have extra space, so we decided to allow her to stay with us. And it was just a few weeks later that my wife and I got the good news. She was pregnant. She was already a couple weeks in, and she and the baby were both healthy and in good shape. It was the best feeling in the world getting that news. I had gotten back into the swing of things with my job and occasionally reading some decent articles on the internet. But it wasn't long before we were days away from the birth of our daughter that I had completely forgotten about the events that had transpired that night that I decided to use the deep web. It was a typical Sunday afternoon. I sat on my back porch drinking some cold sweet tea and listening to the hum of nature. Natural life can be so beautiful. Alone I sat in a serene peace, seemingly impenetrable from the vile world that lay outside the boundaries of my own little haven. That was when I heard a crash and screaming coming from my house. Immediately, I thought it was my sister-in-law watching TV too loud, which she had the tendency to do, but then I heard my wife sobbing uncontrollably. Panic sunk into my heart and I dashed into the house. I entered the large living room just in time to see a large masked man slit my wife's throat. I screamed at him, but he didn't even acknowledge my existence, and I was screaming uncontrollably and ran toward him with the intent to kill. I smashed a glass lamp over his head, but he didn't even flinch. I was questioning if he even felt it or not. He turned around and grabbed me by my throat. He lifted me off the ground and brought my face close to his. "You thought I forgot about you, boy?" I instantly recognized him as the man from the deep web livestream that I saw all those months ago. And that was the last thing that I remember before waking up. I awoke to see my sister-in-law's mangled corpse on the floor. It looked like she'd been cut in freaking half. And to my horror, I saw my beloved wife's body there, drenched in blood. I sobbed uncontrollably for some time, and I'm still not sure how much time passed while I knelt there and sobbed. Time may very well have stood still for all I knew or cared. But after I composed myself, I noticed something strange about my wife's corpse. Her stomach was not nearly as large as I had remembered it to be. I crawled over to analyze her body further, and the wicked idea danced across my imagination. I pushed her on her side, and my hunch turned out to be true. That sick bastard had cut my child out of my wife and had taken it. It was certainly far along enough to have been born at this point. What the frick was I going to do? I called the police, and the operator's apparent apathy toward the situation did nothing but anger me. 911, what's the emergency? The operator said in an uninterested tone. Someone killed my family and I think they took my daughter. I frantically let out in a single breath. I continued to tell them my address. We'll have someone over there as soon as we can. The way she said that frustrated me. Here I am, sitting in a puddle of my family's blood. My life's been drastically changed forever, and she makes it seem as if it's just another day at the office. Where's the empathy? Where's the compassion for your fellow human being? After days of investigation and questioning, they were unable to find the killer or my daughter. I told those lazy freaking cops that this man found me and my family because I used the deep web. But because it was so long ago, I couldn't find the website again. They couldn't do anything about it. And within 2 weeks, they just called it a random act of heinous violence. The story did make the local news, but nothing more happened than that. I guess it wasn't shocking enough. The whole incident was forgotten and people were worried about the next terrible thing. How could I live with myself after this? My entire family was dead because I was snooping around something that I had no business to be partaking in. The following weeks were the worst of my life. I would drink as soon as I got up and then drink all day. Alcohol was the only escape from this freaked up reality that I had to live with. I was a shell of a human, nothing more than a cluster freak of negative, hideous emotions. Misery became my only companion, but I had no one to be miserable with. I had to live this horrible fate alone. Years had gone by when I looked into the mirror to see the unshaven face that I'd come to despise. Every day, I thought about where my daughter might be. Maybe they sent her away to live with a nice, loving family across the country. I half-heartedly deluded myself. Deep down, I knew she was most likely raised in some human trafficking ring where she would be beaten, or even worse, in some hellhole filled with those sick people. I slowly made my way to my porch when I saw a familiar vehicle pull into my driveway. I could barely remember who it belonged to. And when I saw his face, I instantly recognized him. It was my father. I hadn't seen him in years. "Son, I know you're hurting, but this is no way to live your life. Do you think you can move on?" I looked up at him, grimacing. "Do you think I'd be here doing this if I could move on?" He gave me a rough look and said that I needed to get revenge. He placed a revolver on the table in front of me, gave me a stern nod, and left. I was honestly shocked. This was the most religious man that I had known in my life who argued against the killing of any kind. I didn't know if I could do it, but I started to think of how many people those bastards had done this to. I can't be the only one, so if I were to theoretically go through with this, I'd really be doing the world a service. No, to hell with that. I'm avenging my family, and I'm going to save my daughter. Over the next couple of days, I drained my bank account and purchased thousands of dollars in weaponry and ammunition. I quickly realized that there was a lot of illegal stuff that would come in real handy. I turned back to the deep web to buy spying equipment, heavy weapons, and explosives, and it took about a month to gather enough supplies for my suicide mission. And as I sat in my basement with thousands of rounds of ammunition, pounds of explosives, and almost $20,000 in spying equipment, I knew that I was going to wreak havoc on these sons of bitches once and for all. Days went by, and I began to feel lethargic about the whole situation. I hadn't any idea of how I was going to find these people, or even if I could. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. 2 weeks went by of endless hours on the deep web, looking for the bastard who'd taken my family away from me. I came across something that seemed almost familiar in a way. It was another live stream of people torturing a child. I felt a vile hatred rise up from the pit of my stomach. I knew this wasn't my guy, but I'd grown too impatient to wait any longer. If I can't find the needle in the haystack, I guess I'm just going to have to burn down the entire thing. I thought to myself, with hatred oozing from my pores. I made use of some of the spying equipment that I bought and was able to figure out where these bastards were broadcasting from. An evil grin stretched across my face when I figured out they were right here in my own state. I loaded my car with a machine gun, an AK-47, a C4, and I started my drive. This may have been the longest 2 hours of my life. I was so excited to finally kill some of these sick, disgusting people. And after almost taking a wrong turn, I found the rusty old barn house the torture porn was being broadcasted from. There were surprisingly only a few people there. A total of 4 men were running this operation. I watched for a while, but they never came out of the barn house. So with my AK-47 in hand, I made my way to the entrance. I could see them doing despicable things to a small boy no older than 12. He was crying hysterically and covered in blood. They were completely oblivious to me. I aimed my rifle sight down. Admittedly, it took me a minute to actually pull the trigger. But pulling it was much harder than I would have thought. But seeing these sickos violate this defenseless child made me realize these people really were better off dead. I opened fire and screamed as loud as my lungs would permit. From what I could tell, at least 2 of them were dead. 1 was shot but alive, and the 4th noticed quickly enough and got behind a truck. He had a pistol on him and fired back at me. This guy must have been legally blind or something because he missed pretty damn bad. Minutes went by and I slowly crept around to the other side of the building. The one with the gun was screaming at the other one to get up, but he was clearly unable. I got as close to the other gunman as I could in preparation to kill him. I aimed my sight, but I must have made a noise because he heard me. He spun around and shot. The bullet nearly grazed my skull. The gunshot was deafening. I ran toward him, expecting him to have just fired his last shot. He had, and I put a bullet through that person's head. I stood over his bloodied corpse for a brief minute. I wanted to spit on it, but I didn't want to leave any evidence for the cops, so I resisted the urge. I walked over to the one that I shot earlier. Laughing as I did, I placed my boot on his throat. He kept begging for his life, but there was a better chance of hell freezing over before I spared him. I made sure his last minutes on this earth were as miserable as possible. Glaring down at the sick man, I knew I was doing the right thing, and I knew that I was ridding the world of scum. "Please, don't kill me. This wasn't my idea," he begged. "What did you say? You have the nerve to try and talk your way out of your inevitable death. How dare you?" I pulled my leg back, and in one swift motion, I kicked his skull in. His gray matter spilled all over the floor, and the poor boy was sobbing uncontrollably. I pulled out my prepaid cell phone, dialed 911, and told them of the situation. And I told the boy to forget this night and then turned to walk away. The ride home seemed to drag on for hours. I'd heard so many things about having PTSD after killing people. So many articles online said that after killing someone, you'd almost always feel guilty, even if you know you did the right thing. But the truth was, I didn't feel guilty at all. I felt powerful, more powerful than I'd ever felt in years leading up to this day. I knew after I saw that babbling pile of shit beg for his life that I was going to kill again. It felt so right to have someone begging for their life, and knowing that you weren't going to grant them their wish made it all the more satisfying. My life continued like that for many months. I'd spend almost all my free time on the deep web, trying to track down anything that could lead me to my daughter and killing anyone that I deemed worthy to die. I was like an over-the-top vigilante or something. Jesus, those were the days. Eventually, I became more involved in the private sector and started accepting payments to kill people. I gained enough notoriety in the criminal world that almost anyone knew who I was. I just wish that I could go back in time and tell myself how much more money I could make by simply killing people. It makes me realize what a waste of my life teaching those hopeless dipshits really was. I was making chump change compared to what I make now. People apparently pay good money to have someone killed, and I'd already made just under $3 million in the past 6 months. And I didn't even have to repeat the same monotonous lecture 7 times in a day. I almost became apathetic about ever finding my daughter again. She was most likely dead, or even worse. She could be anywhere in the world, and the odds of ever finding her were next to none, I thought. One day, a connection of mine told me he had a really good gig set up. He said that if I could kill 3 people well enough, I could become a regular for an underground overlord. For those of you that don't know, This was the kind of guy who had more money than God. He ran a lot of the underground operations and even had a strong affiliation with the Silk Road before it got shut down. I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I jumped at the chance. I went over the information, and I immediately realized these were going to be the highest-profile people that I would ever kill. When I first discovered I was going to have to kill a family with a young child, I was mortified. The only people that I have had to kill up to this point has been other criminals or sadists. How was I going to bring myself to take the lives of a seemingly innocent family? I would never even know why exactly I was being hired to kill them. You can't ask questions like that to the higher-ups, though. Anyone who did was normally killed themselves, or at the very least, ostracized by the organization that they were trying to work for. It was a pretty serious business that I got myself into. I had no problem with that. I only did what I was told and nothing more. That was part of the reason that I'd gained so much notoriety in my field. In fact, most people in this field never even get a chance to work for the Overlord. And if you're wondering why I keep referring to him as the Overlord, it is because he does not communicate with you directly. There are a lot of people looking for him, and he's responsible for billions in damage and the loss of countless innocent lives, although they don't have a lot of information on him as of right now, and probably will never catch him. The next day, I was going to have to start tracking down this family that I was ordered to kill. But that night, I was in a small bar in the middle of nowhere, downing alcohol like there was no tomorrow, and contemplating how exactly I was going to bring myself to do this. I knew in the pit of my stomach that I wasn't a murderer. Well, let me rephrase that. Not a murderer of the innocent. I had no problem killing the evil men of the earth. I've encountered so many sickos in my life. How could someone torture an animal or another person? I still couldn't bring myself to understand how could anyone do such a thing. Even if I found the man who kidnapped my daughter, I wouldn't torture him. I'd end his pathetic life and I'd be done with him. And even after all that pain and agony that bastard put me through, I still knew that I was better than him, and I wouldn't become the monster that I sought to destroy. The bar began spinning after I downed my 5th shot, and I immediately came to regret this. I didn't feel threatened by the few others in the bar before, but once I lost control of myself, it seemed as if I became all that much more paranoid. I became so much more vulnerable to those around me, and I couldn't die just yet. I knew the events that were soon to come would be life-altering. I had this great feeling about this next job and the opportunities it would bring, which is quite unusual. I never feel intuitive like this. With hopes of surviving until tomorrow, I drunkenly made my way back to the motel that I was staying in. The snow and ice outside made it much more difficult to get there. As sad as it is to say, I ended up falling 3 times before I got home and locked the door. It wasn't a far walk, but adding strong alcohol to any walk makes it seem like a journey around the entire globe. I laid down, and the thought of becoming the most powerful criminal in the world rushed through my mind before I went to the realm of unconsciousness. And that night, I dreamt that I was a hero, destined to save the world. The next morning, my ears were assaulted by the alarm that I'd set on my phone. I downed a couple of aspirins to cope with the headache and got to work. The family that I was going to be attacking lived in a relatively populated area, and I knew if I was going to pull this off, it would have to be quiet. I sharpened 3 separate knives and placed them in my coat pocket. The idea of bringing one of those blades across the neck of a little girl rushed through my mind and made me sick. But I knew that sacrifices were going to have to be made. I knew that I had to be bad for the greater good. And fortunately, I'll never know why I'm killing this family, but I did my best to separate myself from the idea that these were good people. They had to have done something pretty bad to have powerful criminals hiring hitmen to kill them, right? I drove my SUV to their neighborhood and parked down the street at 3 o'clock. Looking toward their backyard, I could see the father, Ronnie Williams, on the back porch. I knew that I was going to have to kill them within the next half hour because the mother, Bridget Williams, would be picking up their daughter from school and would arrive home at 3:30 every day. I thought to myself how easy this job was to do, since someone else had done the monotonous task of stalking these people and recording their schedule. I locked my vehicle and started walking toward the house. I knew where they kept their extra key in the front yard garden and made my way into the house from the front. I waited for Ronnie to come back into the house for 10 minutes before I started to become impatient. I was going to need time to hide the body, I thought, and knew that I needed to do this fast before Bridget and her daughter got home. I decided to push something over in the kitchen and hid behind the refrigerator as Mr. Williams slowly crept into the house saying, "Hello?" And I realized how truly inept this guy was by this. I waited until he came close enough and I reached over to slice his throat open. He screamed, much to my dismay, and I tackled him and plunged the knife into his neck violently, nearly cutting his head off. Watching the blood drip onto the floor drained me in some way, and I sat over the lifeless body of a man who never saw me coming. I collected myself and dragged his body to the basement. My goal was to leave no evidence for the police to find, and making my way up the stairs, I heard the front door opening. I remember the blood all over the kitchen floor. "Shit," I said to myself, and I heard the woman and her daughter start screaming at the sight of the gruesome murder. I quickly rushed upstairs and said, "Ma'am, I need you and your daughter to remain calm. I'm part of the FBI. I'm afraid a murderer has made his way into your house earlier this day," I said. "I want to see some identification," the woman abruptly demanded. I pulled out my fake badge that I always carried around and showed it to them. Anyone who knew anything about federal badges would easily detect it was fake, but most people don't. "Is my husband all right?" she asked me. I told her that he was downstairs, and she slowly made her way down the basement stairs, and I followed closely behind. When she located her husband, she fell to her knees and began sobbing. And that was when I pulled out my knife and slit her throat from behind, and she was dead within seconds. And now, for the hard part, I thought to myself. I made my way back upstairs to find the little girl. She was nowhere in sight. I frantically looked all over the house, but she was nowhere to be found. I grew increasingly worried. I knew that I was being watched by the Overlord, and if he saw this clear display of incompetence, it would hurt any chances that I had of working for him. I began walking up the creaky wooden stairs to continue my search. I knew. I heard a sound coming from behind the door. I slowly and quietly made my way toward it. I wrapped my hand around the shiny doorknob and began to turn. A large German Shepherd dog jumped on me, biting my arm. This caught me by surprise, and I'd been wondering where that damn dog was. I struggled with the beast on top of me for a few minutes, but it was not long that I had my blade through its skin, its blood soaking the cold wooden floor. After composing myself, I continued my search for the girl. This girl is barely 6 years old, I thought. Where could she have gone? There were enough rooms in this house that it could take a while, but I knew that the longer that I was here, the worse it was for me. I checked each room in the house thoroughly, but found nothing. And that was when I remembered that the girl's father had built a fort in the backyard for her. That has to be where she is. I began outside and exited the back door to the porch. I saw that the small makeshift door on the fort was closed, and I knew that I would find her in there. I walked over and opened the door to the fort. She screamed as I forcefully pulled her out of the fort. All her energy was spent trying to free herself, and I tried calming her down, but to no avail. She was crying and sobbing uncontrollably, and I brought her back inside to finish the job. I threw her to the floor as I mentally readied myself to drive my knife through the little girl's heart. I could feel my own moral compass screaming at me to stop this madness. It was hard enough to kill her parents. How was I going to kill their daughter now too? I closed my eyes and I brought my knife close to her chest. She was screaming, but I did my best to distance myself from the whole situation as much as I could, and I closed my eyes and began to focus. The screaming stopped, and I opened my eyes to see the lifeless corpse of the little girl oozing blood onto the floor. I started sobbing as the realization of my actions washed over me like a tidal wave of guilt and regret. I had to do it. I had to do it. I kept telling myself. Yes, you did. A strange voice exclaimed behind me. It sounded really familiar, but I had no idea where I heard it before. I turned around to see a large masked man standing behind me. He began to speak. I know this whole ordeal has been difficult for you, killing your own daughter and such. But What did you say? This was my daughter? But my daughter has been dead for years, I said, cutting him off. What do you think I did when I kidnapped her from you, Johnny boy? I stole her from you and gave her to a loving couple incapable of having a child of their own. And honestly, they did a much better job of raising her than you ever could have, calmly stated. Why? Why would you do this to me? Because I can. And if you even think of attacking me, a bullet will be through your head so fast, your head will spin. I didn't know what to do. I fell to my knees and I began sobbing. Why? Why did I let this happen? Why, God? Why? What the hell was the point of any of this? I thought there was something strange about her. How could I have been so stupid? People always say, when you look into the abyss looks back. And as I stood there over the corpse of my dead daughter, looking into the eyes of the man who'd led me down the road to hell, I knew I was no longer looking down toward a monster. I was looking at an equal. The amount of self-loathing and hatred that lurked in my soul left me devoid of any other feelings. I knew that I was even more despicable than the monster that dragged me down here, for he at least knew he was doing wrong. I have been nothing but a vigilante masquerading as a hero. I'm no hero. I never was. It's ironic in a way. I became the very thing that I set out to destroy. I looked up at the Overlord and I said, "Did I pass the test?" He looked pleased with my response and nodded his head. He extended his arm to help me up, and after getting back up, I lunged at him and managed to place the knife directly into his throat. As I did, a bullet flew by. It was close that I felt the air from the bullet on my skin, and I was so lucky to have made it out of there alive. And I still don't know how I even managed it all though. After achieving that small piece of justice that I'd been waiting for, everything else was a blur. I wrote this as soon as I got home. Thinking back on the whole thing, it seems surreal. What a terrible time it has been this last little while. I don't think I want to continue very much longer though. I miss my family. I miss my unborn daughter. When I'm done writing this, I think I might just join them. I made a mistake going on the deep web. Story by you/The Random Thief. Hey Reddit, yesterday I went onto the deep web through my shitty 2009 laptop to see what it was like. And I think I made a grave mistake. To start off, I should explain why I was on the deep web in the first place. Now, the main reason that I was going on the deep web was just so that I could brag to my friends about how I could access something that they couldn't on the internet. Now, after telling them about this, they thought that I was full of shit and that I was too big of a pussy to go on the deep web or dark net. So, I invited everyone to my house after my school so that we could browse the deep web together. And that is when the shit hit the fan. So, me and my friends were all huddled around my laptop looking at the screen, eager with anticipation of what was to come from this secret underground internet. It started off pretty normal, with us just going on forums and shit just kinda messing around. But it was when we went on this site that called itself Bulala Indlu, which I later put that in Google Translate and figured out that it meant killing house in some language called Soza. Now, as soon as we went on the website, me and my buddies were greeted by pictures of small children who were dead and naked. At first, my friends and I thought that this was all some sick joke because our tiny 14-year-old brains didn't want to accept what we were seeing. So we scrolled down hoping that we would find something that would tell us that this website was just some sick idea of a prank. But we never did. About 5 minutes of scrolling and clicking around, a little box greeted my screen, and in the box was all of my information like my phone number, my address, my social security number, and my full name. And as soon as I finished reading this, I immediately shut off my computer and my friends and I all looked at each other in complete shock. We had no clue what to do, but looking back on it, it was stupid what we finally decided to do. You think that maybe we would go tell my parents or go to the police. But nope. We had the freaking amazing idea to go back on the site and see if all of my info would appear again, and maybe ask someone on the site about it. Yeah, I know. Go back to the site with naked, mutilated, murdered children and ask people on it for advice after getting all my personal information told to me. So, I turned my computer back on, and as soon as it booted up, I was displayed a window saying, "Please, Scott, don't leave us. We want to play with you and have some fun." And once I saw this, I told all my friends to go home and hide. Whatever this was, I didn't want my friends getting hurt because of some creeps like me. It was strange, though, that as soon as my friends went home, another message appeared saying, "If you can entertain us by playing our game, you won't die, and we will leave you alone in peace. Here are the rules of the game. Rule number 1. Every 48 hours, you must complete a task. Rule number 2. If you do not complete the task or try anything funny, you will be brutally murdered. We are watching you." And the final and most important rule, being Rule 3, is have some fun. After that, another window of text appeared saying, "Your task is to kill and eat your biological mother. Enjoy." Please, Reddit, I need some help with this, and I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should call the police or do the task or anything. Just please, help me. I've made this about 20 minutes into my 48 hours, and if I can, I will update this soon with further information. In the time that I have personally spent on the deep and dark web, which I can say with all honesty has probably been way too long, I've seen some incredibly bizarre and really messed up stuff. A lot of what I've seen and done could probably get me into legal trouble if I went into detail. Thankfully, I know what I'm doing for the most part, and I have protected myself. This isn't my first story on your channel, but I'm not going to say which one was mine. I'll leave that for the listeners to figure out. I will say that in that story, the actions were definitely not legal. That said, I thought that I would send you another story and send you one that wasn't me doing anything, but me finding something on the deep web that was genuinely unexpected and legitimately creepy as hell. I can't remember the exact point in time that this happened, but it was probably a while back, pre-COVID, which honestly feels like an eternity ago. So, probably early 2019. I was on one of my typical dark web excursions, trying to decide what I wanted to do while perusing through various onion links, and I ended up on a page that was incredibly out of place. You see, on the dark web, you get tons of strange stuff, adult content, and what have you. But this page looked like someone's personal homepage. This page had a guy's picture on the page, front and center, and it went into a lot of detail explaining who exactly this guy was. It had his name, location, professional experiences, software and apps that he had developed, companies that he had contracted with and worked for, and etc. To be honest, this page could almost have been a substitute for the guy's LinkedIn. You know, if it weren't an onion link on the deep web. I started reading his info out of curiosity, honestly, and I hadn't seen any other page where a person laid out their life for the deep web. But this guy was putting it all out there: experience, education, who he's worked with, what languages he knew, all of it. I seriously went through all of his pages one by one, pretty much becoming this guy's biggest fan, until I got to the bottom. There was a page titled, "To the Love of My Life, Chrissy." I was already this deep into this guy's information, so I figured, why not learn about the person that he obviously was in love with? It couldn't hurt, right? But before I press on into what was on this page, I'm going to remind you that this page was laid out like a CV. This guy was very professional and was obviously very proud of his accomplishments. It had a ton of his personal information, and it seriously looked like something that he could have sent to a prospective employer. But this page undid all of that. At the top of the page was a brief explanation of who exactly Chrissy was. Apparently, Chrissy was a former co-worker to this guy. They had worked together at a previous contract gig, and he was very obviously painfully obsessed with her. This page had a header title that seriously read, "Chrissy is my angel, my light, and God wants me to have her," which was followed by an incredibly cringy poem about how she was his world and how his life was only worth living while he was with her. Then there was a picture of a woman, who I'm going to go out on a limb and assume was Chrissy. Now, all of that was within the first section of the page, and isn't too terrible, right? It's creepy, but it wasn't necessarily terrifying. Well, after that is where things started to get freaking weird. After his quick confession of how much he loved Chrissy, this guy threw out any semblance of sanity, and his mental state became very apparent. He had picture after picture after picture of this woman. Again, creepy. He was obviously collecting pictures of her, but it just kept escalating. Several of these pictures, in fact most of them, were pretty obviously taken without Chrissy's consent. Some looked like they were taken at company events or with friends. Some looked like they were taken from a Facebook page. But a lot of them were taken of her at candid moments. There were pictures of her at her desk, at an office, in the parking lot, eating lunch with friends, at a park with, I'm assuming, her husband and kids, the grocery store. There were even some pictures taken of her through a window and through curtains, of her in pajamas, and some of her in her underwear in her home. This guy was clearly a stalker, which, yeah, was obvious, but he had taken it to almost the furthest level he could. By this point, we've clearly established that he was an obsessed stalker creep, but there was more. He had actually photoshopped Chrissy's face onto adult models, and then photoshopped his own face onto males in the same pictures. Each picture has its own description of what it was supposed to be like. Me and Chrissy on our honeymoon, a hot summer night, expressing our love, and etc. And all of them obviously photoshopped pictures of adult content with their faces. This man was obsessed, yes, which is creepy in its own rights, but this was a level above obsession. This was him living out a creepy fantasy with a woman that had a life of her own, and she had no idea how deep in love with her this weirdo was. I honestly felt bad for her, and if I knew how to get a hold of her, I would have let her know so she could file a restraining order. I remember after all the freaky pics, there was a section at the end that said something like, "Chrissy and I are soulmates. We met in heaven before we came to earth, And God wants us to be together. We will be the modern Adam and Eve, lovers meant to usher in the future. She will see how much I love her, and we will embrace as we welcome our new lives. Which, to me, sounded a bit like him saying he was going to force her to love him. But I don't know. In the end, this was one of the weirdest things that I have seen on the dark web. It may not be super creepy to some people, but it just makes me wonder how many weirdos obsessed with their women co-workers like this and don't build their own dark web shrine. Have you ever been in a position where you found yourself questioning everything you believed to be true? Perhaps it was something religious or political. Maybe someone you trusted did something to undermine your trust in them. Maybe someone close to you turned out to be a monster. When I was a sophomore in high school, my father began what he referred to as a project in our basement. He never specified what this project entailed, only that it was for his business, and whatever went on down there was to be kept strictly confidential. Hell, he even went so far as to soundproof the basement walls. And although I found it strange that his business would require that level of secrecy, I didn't push the issue. As for my social life, I had a small group of friends at school, some of whom were into all kinds of kinky, bizarre, and sometimes outright disgusting pornography. I typically tuned out whenever the subject came up, as I didn't spend much time on the internet. I would just look up NFL or NBA highlights, and social media sites like Twitter and Facebook never really appealed to me. One day, my friend Kevin brought up a subject that I had never considered before and has come to haunt me ever since. Something he referred to as the dark web. What he described was horrific. Hitman advertisements, videos of animal abuse and mutilation, crush porn, and realistic or possibly even genuine depictions of awful things. I'm not sure why, but his descriptions of this dark web piqued my curiosity. Could such a freaked out place truly exist on the internet? Kevin invited us over for the weekend so he could show us what he was talking about, and we agreed to come over. Saturday came, and Kevin had managed to hack into the dark web. And it didn't take very long for the rest of us to see that he was telling the truth. All the awful things he had described to us were on full display. It was nauseating to say the least, and after about 20 minutes of scrolling down, Kevin came across a link to an untitled live stream. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the link. The screen changed to pitch black, and after a short time, we were greeted by a digital clock gradually counting down. And when it reached 0, the numbers disappeared and the black screen remained. For the next 30 seconds or so, we heard a deep and raspy breathing sound. Eventually, a beam of light appeared, presumably from a flashlight, and it illuminated some strange man wearing a hideous mask, a top hat, a suit, and a cape. And when he spoke, his voice was distorted, I'm guessing to help keep his identity hidden.
Good evening.
The man finally spoke.
And thank you all for joining us this evening. You may call me Hawkins. And boy, do we have a show for you tonight. A pair of helpless victims.
With that, the rest of the screen became illuminated. We saw a small room with the walls painted red. On the back wall were two women, one very obese and the other in good shape, both of them nude and trapped to a wall in mounted cufflinks. Hawkins approached the obese woman and stroked her face very creepily.
"Oh, you are one ugly, disgusting bitch. Ugly creatures like yourself don't deserve to share the world with the pretty ones."
He then glanced at the second, more attractive woman.
"Am I right?"
She said nothing.
"I have something special planned for you, sweetheart. But first, let us deal with the ugly one."
I began feeling nervous. I was hoping this was all just a strange act, but with everything that we had been shown on the dark web so far, I wasn't too sure of that.
"Garden shears!"
Hawkins shouted. A pair of hands appeared from off camera to give the masked man some garden shears. He then approached the woman and pried the shears open.
"What a pity. If only you were better looking, I might not have to do this."
And with that, he began cutting into the woman's breast, leading to deafening screams. My friends and I all gasped in shock, one of whom began to vomit. He then brought his attention to her ankles and tried cutting through them but couldn't.
"No matter. Chainsaw!"
I felt queasy at the mention of a chainsaw, and after receiving the item, he cut off the woman's feet and then began cutting into her abdomen, leading to blood and guts spraying everywhere. The obese woman passed out from shock, while the second woman also began sobbing in terror. Eventually, Hawkins shut off the chainsaw.
"Let her bleed. Now, as for you, whip."
The unseen assistant handed him a whip, and he proceeded to give the second woman a number of brutal lashings. When he was finished flagellating her, he released her from her cufflinks, and she dropped to the floor very suddenly, and before she could get up, Hawkins kicked her very hard in the abdomen. It was at this point when Kevin noticed a chat box on the side. Most of the messages from viewers were expressing utter glee and satisfaction at this horrific sight. Outraged, Kevin typed into the chat box, "What the hell is wrong with you people? I warn you, the police will hear about this." As the surviving woman lay gasping for air on the floor, Hawkins unzipped his pants and appeared to be taking a position behind her. Suddenly, the anonymous assistant spoke up. "Hey boss, check out this message." Hawkins kicked the woman again and walked over to the webcam.
"Oh, a tough guy, huh? Gonna call the cops on me, eh, Kevin?"
It was like a ton of bricks was dropped on all of us. Did that man really just mention my friend's name? Suddenly, a box appeared containing his full name and address, and Kevin was frozen in terror.
"Whatever. I have all the information I need on you. Looks like I'll be seeing you soon."
Hawkins walked away back toward the woman, and Kevin finally shut the computer off and curled up into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. The rest of our friends bailed out, but I chose to stay behind, even though I was also frightened out of my wits. Fortunately, nothing happened that night, but Kevin did not get any sleep at all. He was a nervous wreck for the next few days, unable to concentrate in class and staying quiet at lunch table when he was normally very talkative. Several weeks passed, and he began to mellow out and return to his old self. The situation on the dark web appeared to have blown over. Until one Friday night, that is. I was watching the 10 o'clock news when a report broke out about a mass homicide that occurred a few miles away. I was shocked and horrified when I saw a reporter standing outside what I recognized as Kevin's house. His mother, father, and both his siblings were found dead, and Kevin himself was reported as missing. My God, they got him, I said to myself. I woke up in the middle of the night to relieve myself when I saw my father reach the top of the staircase. His clothing was covered in dirt, which I found very odd. Dad, it's 2 a.m. What are you doing awake? Fixing a busted sprinkler. At 2 a.m.? Why not? Is there some law that says I can't? I sighed and said, Whatever, Dad. And I did my business, then went back to sleep. The next afternoon, my dad went out to run some errands. While he was gone, I suddenly decided out of the blue to check out the basement. And looking back, I'm not sure why I picked this particular moment to be a naughty boy. I didn't usually have a rebellious streak, but what the hell? I wanted to see what the secrecy was all about. I reached the bottom of the stairs and began checking out the basement. So far, nothing looked out of the ordinary from the last time that I had set foot down there, aside from a few items being in a different place. Then, I looked underneath the staircase, and I had noticed something that definitely was not there before. A door. I walked to the door and opened it, and a light turned on automatically, and what I saw shook me to my very core. It was a small room with red walls and mounted cufflinks. In a corner, I saw blood-stained garden shears and a chainsaw. On the wall, next to the door, was a desk with a computer and a webcam. I also saw that ugly mask, that same mask worn by the man that I only knew as Hawkins. I was standing in the same room where the awful livestream took place weeks earlier. I heard my father's voice shouting upstairs when he noticed that the basement door was open. He came down cussing up a storm, but he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me standing in the entry of his secret room and holding the mask. We stared at each other in an awkward silence for a long time. My father was arrested shortly thereafter. He had soundproofed the walls to prevent the possibility of anyone's screams from being heard around the house. My friend Kevin and those 2 women from the live stream were buried in the backyard, their bodies thoroughly dismembered and laid on top of one another. I guess that explains my father's late-night yard work. And as to why he took the name Hawkins as his dark web identity, he confessed to murdering another man back in 1995. The man's name was Carl Hawkins. 5 years have passed since I discovered the truth about my father. I haven't paid him one visit in prison. Eventually, he will be executed by means of lethal injection. I wish I could say that I'm saddened by this. He is still my father after all. But I feel cold and indifferent. Now, I am left to wonder whether he passed on some kind of bad seed to me. I fear that one day I will snap and become the same kind of monster that he had become. There is also a matter of my father's assistant. Who is he? my father refused to give away his identity. It makes me wonder if the mysterious assistant has begun his own sick little show on the deep web. I don't intend to find out, and I am never going on the deep web ever again. I've only had one bad experience with the deep web, and it is way more than enough in my personal opinion. I'm not an overly technical person, and I'm not a tech genius. I'm no hacker extraordinaire, but I do know my way around the internet, and I have an understanding of what indexing and non-index pages or deep web actually are. I took a few classes on the internet security, and there were a couple sections dedicated to deep web and dark web, or at least explaining what they were and how the technology worked, like onion routing and encryption, and I felt confident enough to get on the deep web and thought that I could keep myself safe. And that confidence was my first mistake, but in my defense, this situation could have happened on the surface web. It just made it that much creepier that it was on the deep web. Because I wasn't interested in any of the illegal content on the dark web, I kept myself confined to the part of the deep web that were closer to the surface. Basically, the wading pool of the deep web. Of these pages, I mostly visited things like forums and discussion boards, and I had this personal appreciation for anonymous conversations. And while I wasn't a troll or aggressive or anything, I was a bit more out with my opinion and personality, as there wasn't a name associated with the statement. Now, in order for this to all make sense, I have to explain a bit about what happened, and then kind of explain the how, because it won't make sense otherwise. As I stated, I spent a good amount of time on the forums. I spoke with people that I honestly considered my friends, and I learned a lot. It was actually kind of nice, kind of like there was a place that I belonged, like a bar, but with text and random people that were faceless. Now, on the main forum I would use, most people signed their posts and messages with a pseudonym. Of course, there was no control over this, and anyone could use anyone else's name on their post, and no one would be the wiser. Strangely enough, it was kind of an honor system, and most people followed it. My name on this site was ironically, No Girls on the Net. It was supposed to be a joke, a play on the claim that there are no girls on the internet, just guys pretending to be girls. This was ironic because I was a girl. Anyways, on this forum, I was fairly well known to a lot of people in my subboards, and people would refer to me as girl. I know, not exactly specific, but typically, when someone said girl, they were talking to me. Anyways, I was friends with a lot of people on this page, and they were all decent. Never ran into anyone that I thought was really creepy for the most part. But that all fell apart when I got a message on Facebook one day from some guy that I had never seen before named Derek. And the message just said, "Hey girl." At first, I didn't put two and two together. I thought he was just being a douche, and I told him as such. My response was simply, "What an incredibly rude and derogatory way to refer to someone. Give me one reason I should even bother responding to you beyond this." This guy responds with, "I thought that's what everyone called you. At least, that's what I've always called you. You're No Girls on the Net, right?" When I read this, I was a bit freaked out. How had this person found my personal Facebook? There was absolutely no connection between me and that account, and I was always careful not to post anything that could be considered personally identifiable. And I had no idea how he could have connected the dots. I asked who he was, and he once again asked if that was my username. I didn't want to tell him yes, but I also didn't want to say anything that may indirectly confirm that it was me. So, I ended up just having to say that it wasn't me and that I hoped that he found whoever it was that he was looking for. He responded with a smiley face, and then that was it for that conversation. I thought that was the end of it. I thought he had bought it. But I was wrong. I was very wrong. About a week later, I got a letter in the mail. And while this was a bit off, in today's day and age that is, I didn't think much of it. I took it in and opened it, then pulled out the letter. It was a printed letter that pretty much just said, "Don't lie to me, girl. I know it's you. I want to get to know you better. Here's my phone number. Shoot me a text when you get this. P.S. I will know that you got it." I was seriously freaked out. This guy was sending me letters, which meant that he knew my address. Not only that, but he claimed that he would somehow know if I got the letter and didn't tell him. How? That's when I looked over the envelope to see if I could find a return address. And then I realized that there wasn't one. On top of that, there weren't any stamps on the envelope either, which meant that it hadn't gone through the post office and it was most likely hand-delivered, which then told me how he was going to know I got it. My next mistake was calling the number. If I was going to fix this problem, I was going to have to do it head-on. I pulled out my phone and called him, and when he answered, he started off with, "Hey, sweetheart." I was legitimately disgusted. My response to him was, "I'm not your sweetheart. I don't even know who the hell you are. How did you find my information?" He avoided the question, but started saying that he was in love with me and that he needed me in his life. I once again told him that I had no idea who he was and that I wasn't interested. He told me to get interested or things were going to be difficult between us. I had had enough. I told him that he was a creep and that he needed to get a life, and then I hung up. He tried calling me back a couple times, but I ignored it. Then, he texted me, and I think that I nearly pissed myself. The message that he sent me said, "You're going to love me, one way or another. Don't make me hurt you." Then, followed it up with, "See you later, sweetheart." Obviously, I was panicked. This dude was a super creep, and he had no issue with being creepy out in the open like this. But I really didn't have much in ways of options since he hadn't actually done anything. Being a creep isn't really a crime until they escalate. Well, it escalated pretty quickly. It was actually that same night when things happened. Around 8 that evening, I heard a knock on my door. I, unfortunately, knew it was most likely him. I pulled the curtain open from the side window, and I saw this guy standing there in a hooded sweatshirt and black pants, pretty obvious red flag in this case. He stood there at the door and kept knocking, then started yelling that he knew that I was home. I stayed off to the side where he couldn't see me, and I dialed 911 on my cell phone. When they asked what the emergency was, I said, loud enough for him to hear me, that there was some creep trying to break into my house, hoping that it would be enough to get him to go away. What I didn't expect was him to smash the glass of my front door with a hammer and reach in to unlock the door. What he didn't expect was my brother, a trained police officer, to come around the corner with his gun locked on him the second he stepped into the house. As soon as my brother screamed, "Get on the ground!" this guy started yelling, "Don't shoot me," and then fell to his knees. My brother restrained him, and the cops showed up to arrest him. When they got him out and in their car, they came back to tell us what they had pulled off of him. This dude came with zip tie cuffs, a large knife, the hammer obviously, and a pillowcase stuffed into the hoodie pocket. Basically, it was like that he planned to kidnap me, cuff me, put the pillowcase over my head, and take me out to his van, which he had parked just outside. In the van, they found condoms, adult toys, and various other creeper things that I don't really want to think about right now. So that's the what. But the question becomes the how. How did he find me? How did he know who I was? How did he connect my stupid username with me as a person? Easy. I was an idiot, and apparently had clicked a link that he posted on the forum. This guy had linked to something on the forum page that I apparently was interested in, and it had malware that loaded into my system because I had some stupid software, something like JavaScript or Flash or something that was out of date, and this guy was able to drop a keylogger on my system. That, plus those fantastic little things in Chrome and Firefox that will save your personal info for quicker entry. Things like your address and name and all that. Yeah, that helped him tremendously. This guy had infected my system, and I had, unbeknownst to me, given him all my personal information. Then he turned into a super creep. Like I said above, this could have technically happened on the surface web, but I think it was more likely to happen on the deep web forum, because I had taken my anonymity for granted. I thought I was safe. I thought I was invincible because my name was not connected to the board or the post. So take that as a lesson. Do not think that anonymity is invincibility, and make sure you update your computer. Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. So, I am not a techie like some of the people here, but I at least do know what I need to do when it comes to accessing the deep web. That said, I don't go digging for creepy stuff, and I don't ever go for anything illegal. On the deep web, there is a lot of content that is just slightly too raunchy for the surface web and isn't posted for the masses. A good number of deep web sites don't even crack into the illegal category. That's basically the main difference between the dark web and the deep web. A lot of what I know on the deep web is people talking bullshit about random things: politics, modern science, technology, cryptids, and other supernatural stuff, as well as conspiracy theories. Some of those conspiracy theories can get really freaking weird. In fact, that's kind of what my story here is about. So, one of the sites that I would use a lot was a discussion board for conspiracy theories and craziness about how there were demons among us that were going to take over the world. A lot of it sounded like insane people rambling off scripts that you would find in the trash bin at the Sci-Fi Channel headquarters. But some of it was interesting, and all the theories there had their ardent followers. The people that seemed to run most of the theories were those that genuinely believed that our governments around the world were run by demons that sacrificed children to drink their blood. Like, seriously, crazy stuff. I remember that there was one user that was seriously crazy about this theory. I think his name was something like Devil's Home or something. I remember it being something about Dave and home, so I'm just going to call him Dave. Dave would post on every single thread that he could find, and he would egg on the initial poster to the point that he was almost rewriting their theories. What's worse is he seemed to believe in every single crazy theory that was posted. A government run by baby-eating demons? Yep, totally true. Same government somehow being run by space-faring lizard people. Also, just as true. Disney seeking subtle hints into their kids' movies to get everyone hooked on cocaine. Sure, why the hell not? It was as if this guy refused to see reality for what was in front of his eyes. Everything had a hidden agenda. Everything was some plot to control the masses. And everything was worth questioning. I don't think Dave could have made a cup of coffee without accusing the coffee maker of trying to take away his God-given freedoms. Anyways, as quickly as I saw Dave make a new post on the forum, I noticed that he had almost entirely disappeared. I went over to his profile to see what he had posted lately, only to find that he had made a final thread called "Don't Trust the Admin." This thread outlined that the admins of the forum site were attempting to find him so that they could send a hitman to take him out of the picture. It had a ton of seemingly irrelevant details and included pictures of random people that Dave claimed were following him for the admins. He then rounded the whole thing out with an onion link to a website that he had created so that he could continue on with his ramblings. I went over to his website and read all of his posts, and they legitimately just kept getting crazier and crazier. Eventually, I'd had enough of his absolute craziness, and I decided to log off for a while. I kind of stopped getting on the deep web for a little bit, mostly because I really didn't have time, and I was feeling the stress of my first year in college. After a while, I think it was a couple of months between my last check, I decided that I wanted to get on and see what all Dave had gotten up to. I went back to the forum, went to his account, and then to his personal site or blog, only to find that there were over 300 new updates. This man had seriously posted over 300 times within maybe a month and a half, at most. And I started down the rabbit hole of his post, and his theories started getting really abstract. Some of them made some sense, like he would have clear moments in the crazy fog, but a lot of them were things like, the Russian government is watching you with a satellite that comes around every week, and how meat that you buy at the store isn't really meat, but a plasticine-like material that was synthesized, and that it contained hormones to make people dumb. It was all honest-to-God insanity. Then I got to the end of the feed, and I felt bad for laughing at his post. His last post was simply titled, "I can't do it anymore." It was probably the most lucid thing that he had written on the page. and explained that his mother had passed away from cancer. Of course, he blamed Big Pharma for this, but then went on to explain that the stress of life was too much for him and he couldn't keep up. He outlined some of his theories about the government running our lives and explained that if he couldn't live free, then he wouldn't live at all. He finished off the post saying, "To all my friends that have helped me to see clearly over the years, I thank you, and may God bless you all." Then, he posted a picture of a hand holding a pistol of some sort. There was nothing after this post, and the few comments that existed were just people saying that God would understand his decision and that he was truly a soldier fighting for the truth. Obviously, this was pretty depressing, and I was a bit freaked out knowing that this guy that I was making fun of in my head was most likely not alive and was also most likely dealing with mental health issues. In the end, I didn't really go back or spend any time on the deep web. Dave's story had a bit of a lasting effect on me and taught me a lesson about sympathy.
You've Googled yourself at some point or another. Admit it. There's nothing shameful about it, but it's not worse than what I did. I searched my name on the dark web. Don't ever make that same mistake. Now let's get to it. I was 19 years old then. Liv, my girlfriend, and her family were kind enough to let me live in their guest bedroom at the start of the year. They liked the fact that I could fix most of their computer problems. Liv was a great person, and what she saw in a hacker who could never survive for long in the 9-to-5 world is beyond me. Their house was in a suburb only a few blocks away from a library and coffee shop with free Wi-Fi. These locations were convenient for what I did. I used those resources until I was able to move out and get a small apartment of my own. After a string of demeaning jobs and abusive bosses, I found financial independence. I did this after I learned how to buy and sell things I shouldn't have with the use of my Tor browser. I engaged in illegal transactions such as ordering counterfeit money and stolen IDs. I discovered there was a market for manufactured psychedelics. I often went to the skate park to sell these things off, so business was good. A young man with years spent in foster care, I sought out activities which gave me a sense of control. A childhood of not having any would do that to you. The ability to navigate online world to get almost whatever I wanted afforded me a sense of power. It was all going well until one evening in July. I sat on the second level of Barnes & Noble bookstore on a corner next to the self-help section. I always did my best work there. The place was starting to go under and I did not have to worry about an influx of patrons. Despite having a disguised IP address, I never wanted to risk a raid at home. The items were always shipped to a P.O. box instead of my unit number. In retrospect, these were all flimsy safety measures. They still gave me a sense of comfort, even if they were a tad delusional. I made sure there weren't any cameras mounted near where I sat. It was a small space out of the way of the general public. Hiding in plain sight was always my preferred method. I drank strong coffee out of an oversized styrofoam cup. After 15 minutes of searching, I grew bored. I typed in my name, Joshua Wells. An input of my identity on the part of the web should be an indicator of how successful and arrogant I had become. I did not expect Wikipedia to be among the results, but it was the third link down. The first one involved a ghost tour in New Jersey. The guide had a similar name. The second was a gore website I was not interested in. While I may have been a thrill seeker, I was not out to consume media which capitalized on hurting others. I clicked on the third article link because of the title. It was about a television show. It read, The Short Life of Joshua Wells. At first, the title did not startle me, since there are plenty of others with the same name. Recaps of 10 episodes were on the page. The first paragraph illustrated how the series did not continue past season 1. I read the summary of the first episode for the sake of passing time. Episode 1. Joshua's father is a known and feared gang member. His mother is a helpless addict. She attempts to use their own son as a drug mule on a plane flight from Boston to California. She has hopes of making a profit by dealing narcotics to a major criminal enterprise on landing. Their son goes to CPS. He goes to a safe harbor for kids. The synopsis struck me as very close to home. Who wrote or directed the show was not listed, but it did state the air date. The month and year given matched the era when an identical set of circumstances had befallen me. The name of the center I went to was called Safe Harbor. I was too young to remember much, but the facts were precise. I gulped and tried to shrug it off as an unusual coincidence. I read the second episode summary. Episode 2. We follow Joshua on his 15th birthday. He goes to a juvenile detention facility for the first time after he attacks a teacher by throwing a desk at him. Although he missed, the instructor still presses charges, since he did not like the student much. He befriends a troublemaker on the inside named Ian. They escape, but not before a massive brawl with the other students ensue inside one of the facilities. It ends with 2 captured. I felt the hairs on my arm stand up. It was uncanny to me how similar the events were to my own experiences. A slight dizziness overtook me, but I went on to the third, unable to keep my eyes from skimming. Episode 3. Joshua is free. Joshua decides to break and enter an old man's upper-class home after scouting the place for days. His goal is to take the many Rolex watches from the top drawer of the old man's dresser. When he enters the house, Joshua discovers how the owner did not take this vacation cruise as he planned. The man was asleep in his bedroom until Joshua wakes the victim up by accident. Joshua runs away. He gets chased by the homeowner outside, where the elderly male dies of a heart attack in the street. I felt my chest tighten. It was all true, but I had never shared that story with anyone before. It was one of my most guilt-ridden memories. I read the next 2 episodes. Episode 4. Joshua has nightmares of the old man crawling out of a ditch and choking him to death. He complains about the terrors to one of his counselors. He recommends a doctor. He ends up selling anti-anxiety pills after he does not like the way that they make him feel. A girl he asks out overdoses and goes to the hospital. While she survives, he feels terrible, but not enough to stop dealing. He takes his earnings and buys a PC. He takes lessons on how to breach other people's privacy from a group of credit card thieves he met in the mall. Episode 5. Joshua discovers the dark web. He uses it to hustle low-level street drugs. He later reads the headlines about how some of the people are getting arrested. He still continues to engage in illicit activity. I looked at the air date of episode 6. It was the 24-hour period I was living through. Episode 6. Joshua goes into the bookstore to poach their internet, and he tries to make some money. He does not realize there is a man with a shaved head and a Carhartt t-shirt below him pursuing the sci-fi aisle. The stranger is actually an undercover FBI agent. The government worker has a microphone and a camera attached beneath his shirt. He is surveying for the perpetrator, even though he has not singled out who he is looking for yet. An arrest commences where they tackle, punch, and taser Joshua. They place him in handcuffs. At this point, my hand shook. I stood, gripped an Eckhart Tolle volume to appear less conspicuous, and opened it. I leaned my head over the railing to stare at the ground floor below me. A man who matched the description given by the article, he was standing right there. His t-shirt was baggy and hid what I knew to be a gun in his hip. He held a paperback in his hand. I pulled out my phone. I pretended to have a conversation with an imaginary business associate about stocks. I folded the laptop with my free hand and went down the escalator. I strode toward the back where there were stacks of hardcovers. I found an unsecured door and I walked through it. I was in a warehouse. Unopened boxes were stacked all around me. I did not spot any workers and I made a run for the near entrance. I sprinted down a wide alleyway between the building and the rows of motels. I passed an art gallery and liquor store before my heartbeat slowed. Along the way, I found a closed vegan restaurant called Valenti's Eatery. The place was black on the inside, but its neon sign still glowed. A picnic table sat on the lawn out front. I stationed myself right there. I opened the laptop again and connected to their free Wi-Fi. I scanned the rest of the story. The remaining episodes were all future time periods. I wiped the sweat away from my forehead as I read the rundown of the next episode. Episode 7. A labeled darknet market operator in the media. 3 of the 7 charges thrown at him led to convictions. This includes conspiracy to traffic narcotics. He gets out early after he agrees to cooperate with the different agencies. He becomes a consultant for cybersecurity awareness and social engineering expert. Following a keynote speech given out of town, he comes home. His girlfriend Olivia and her family have been murdered. My eyes strained and I felt my breath grow shallower. Episode 8. Joshua navigates her house. The walls had dried blood. Every corner is vandalized. Olivia's throat is slit. Her body is over the couch of the living room area. Her parents had socks stuffed in their mouths and deep stab wounds on their stomachs. Joshua calls the police. He's treated as the #1 suspect in the media for days on end. He's finally cleared, but the psychological damage is too much to bear. I pondered the words. Though I was still young, it is true that live meant everything to me. Episode 9. Joshua goes to a psychiatric ward. He stares at the padded walls as though they will converse with him. Detectives do visit him with the hopes of gleaning some kind of further information. They tell him that they know the aftermath of the massacre he stumbled upon was the work of an active serial killer. The murderers remain unidentified. Episode 10. Joshua leaps out of the window. He breaks his ankle. An adrenaline dump allows him to move across the field onto the nearest highway. He goes out into traffic. A long-haul truck careens around him and takes out a line of vehicles. He goes to the nearest lake, where he weighs his own pockets down with stones. He waits until nightfall and walks out into the abyss. The last image that we see is his hand breaking the surface of the water. Starlight glints on his skin before his fingers submerge below the surface. His last few swallows of water create pockets of bubbles, which rise to the top. I absorbed what the rest of my existence would look like. 4 black SUVs pull up and circle around me in the parking lot. Men in black suits and the undercover agent from the bookstore ran at me. Even though I did not resist, they still threw me on the ground. They dislocated my shoulder and kicked me in the jaw a handful of times before they cuffed me. I did get time reduced in prison after I agreed to cooperate to catch people like me. After my release date, I've tried to revisit that link without luck. I fail to understand how the article existed in the first place. I read how high-level stress can open up sites and portals into the unknown. I would blank on the latter, though sometimes I think it isn't for me to know. I don't want to give into what destiny has written for me. My escape from the bookstore has given me the confidence that I can change the outcome of the dark web's prophecy, even if only for a little while. Or will I only extend what will actually happen for a fraction of time? Fate, especially in our regards to our stories as individuals, is not written in stone. Will I tell myself that? This positive thought is the only thing which keeps me going. I should visit Liv's house now. She has not answered my texts or anything all morning.
The story goes back a few years. I don't recall the exact year, but it was probably between 2010 and 2011. I would have been 20 because I was living with my parents, but attending night college classes. Not really important, but it does help to explain that I wasn't a kid at that time, and I should have known better. Anyways, like a lot of people that have understanding of surface web versus the deep web, I was dumb and curious. There was this one guy in one of my classes that was obviously a basement dweller. Not trying to be rude, he just looked the part. I'm not going to describe him, you know the stereotype, but let's call him Jason. Jason was a bit antisocial, but he and I were decent friends due to our mutual interest in technology. I remember that there was one night that class let out early, and he and I went out to the lounge on campus and were just talking about random tech stuff. He brought up the dark web, and at that time, I wasn't really knowledgeable on what exactly it was. His explanation was pretty straightforward. It was a collection of sites and pages that were essentially hidden from the everyday user, and because of this, it was rife with illegal activity. At first, his explanation was enough to make me lose interest. But then he started showing me the pages that he used. He said that the main one was basically a bulletin board like 4chan, but better. He warned me that some of it was questionable, but there were sections where people would talk about philosophy, new technology, politics, and conspiracy theories. Now, I'm a bit of a conspiracy nut, not in that I believe in them, but that I love to read them and see what these people think. Obviously, some of them are completely insane, but there are some theories that are interesting and really get you thinking. When Jason told me about this conspiracy board, it caught my attention. I told him that I wanted to get in on it, and he gave me a look that basically said, "I don't think you should be doing this." I told him that I understood the risk and that I would take any precaution that he suggested. I guess this was enough to convince him, and he gave me a list of things to do when I got home in order to get on the site. He then gave me the onion link to the page, and that was that. I went home and got on my desktop downstairs, and then I set up everything that he had said to set up. From there, I got on the bulletin and spent the entire night reading various conspiracy theories and paranormal explanations. Honestly, this was a highlight of the year. These were some of the craziest theories that I have ever read, and after a few days, I started feeling a bit more comfortable and started commenting on posts. For the most part, I would prod for more information, and people were shockingly respectful. I was genuinely surprised how straightforward the posts were. The people seemed almost decent, and most of them were fairly dismissive to the less than desirable theories out there, ones that were against certain races or religions. To be completely honest, this page felt more like a surface web page. They were mostly respectful and open to discussion. And the only reason that I could think that this was a deep website would be that they wanted a place to call their own and not get a ton of traffic. But then, it all went south fast. There was one post where the theory started in on something interesting, but then immediately turned their entire theory into a pile of racist drivel. There weren't any comments on the post yet, so I decided to comment and be a bit of an ass to this guy. Maybe the anonymity had gotten to me, but I posted something like, "Get your racist bullshit off the board. Your kind isn't welcome here." It was a basic comment, but I was satisfied that others would back me up and that this guy would get a hint and go away. But after a few minutes, I went back to the post to see if there were any responses. No surprise, there was. I opened the thread and there was only one comment from the original poster, and it said the following: "F off, David." I was a bit shocked. My name is in fact David, but I had no idea how he could have known that. I started thinking back to whether or not that I had maybe posted my name in another thread. If he had somehow linked me to that post. I had followed all of Jason's recommendations and covered my tracks in every way that he had recommended. But I decided to feign ignorance. I commented with, "My name's not David. Nice try though." I think that was where I made my biggest mistake. I shouldn't have challenged him. I should have ignored him and moved on. And he replied within a few moments, "Oh really? You're not David?" He stated my last name. "Living with Carol and Larry." He stated our last name. At 1706, he said our street name. "In Asheville, Virginia?" Attending, he said my college name. And working part-time at, and the place of my work. I was completely in awe. This person had completely gathered all of my personal information within a matter of minutes, and it was completely accurate. I was honestly sweating at the prospect of this dark web rando knowing exactly who I was. I decided that I would comment one more time and basically concede this conversation. I wrote, "You win, I'll shut up," or something like that. There may have been more panic in my comment than that. I went back after a few moments and noticed that his original comment was gone, and in its place was the following: "Overridden by Maud. To David, I'll remove your info this time as a courtesy, but it's best if you keep your mouth shut from now on. Also, get a better VPN. Your current one is leaking your IP." Apparently, the VPN that Jason told me to use had an information leak, one that he wasn't aware of, and one that gave away my actual location and registered information. I told Jason about what happened, and he laughed at me. He told me that it was my fault because I didn't do an IP check while connected to see if my info was hidden. He was right. That was part of his checklist. So that's my dark web story, and it's my only dark web story. Mostly because I never went back. This happened a couple years ago. I don't remember the exact month or year, but it couldn't have been more than just a few years ago because Bitcoin was at or near its peak. I used to spend a lot of time on the deep web, mostly on forums and things like that, but never on anything that was explicitly illegal. I know, that sounds incredibly convincing, right? Believe it or not, there are pages on the deep web that are good for entertainment. Some of them are in the gray area as far as ethics go, but again, not explicitly illegal. And some of them only become illegal if you take action on the page, I think. Look, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know. Anyways, I was browsing pages without intent to actually do anything on them and was just perusing through random onion links to see what interesting stuff I could find. And after checking out some random pages that sold things that definitely were not legal, I found a page that, well, again, definitely was not legal. From the start on the page, I knew that this page was serious. The name of the page was something like L.H. Oswald Solutions, an obvious allusion to Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who assassinated JFK. Honestly, seeing that made me chuckle. Something about using Oswald's name for the page was genuinely humorous. But after reading their information, it was pretty clear on why they used that as the name. The entire page was meant for users to pay Bitcoin and hire a hitman. The page explained that they had top-tier men working for them, and price categories as well. The product started at intimidation and included things like arson, murder designed to look like a failed robbery, and had other tiers that were meant to make it look like an accident. The last one was the most expensive, obviously, and they gave scenarios on how it could happen, including hiking incidents, accidental drownings, and car troubles. Now, I had no intent in doing anything on this page other than reading what they had to say, mostly for entertainment. But then, I got to the bottom of the main page, and they had a full-on legal disclosure, which I thought was hilarious. It explained what actions could be taken if they failed and laid out their personal guarantee that they could find anyone and everyone without fail. Immediately after this was a small note at the bottom. We can find anyone and we can prove it. Click here for proof. Now, I know what you're thinking. No sane person would ever click that link, and no one could be as stupid as to click it intentionally. I didn't want to, but I had to. I had to know how they would guarantee that they could find anyone. So, I clicked the button, and the page switched over to a plain black site with a smiley face and an hourglass icon that indicated it was loading. After a few seconds, the hourglass turned into a check mark. At first, I thought that was it. It was just going to sit there with a check mark, and that was it. Then, much to my surprise, my cell phone started ringing. Obviously, I was freaking out inside, but I answered my phone anyway. I said, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was digitized, thankfully, and it basically said, "Here's your proof. Thank you for considering our services." A few times, and then hung up. I was actually grateful that it was a robocall and not a real person, but I was also terrified that it was able to find my number and call me. This was enough to tell me that they weren't screwing around and that I needed to never go to their website or question whether or not those hitman sites are legit ever again. As has been stated in a number of other stories on the net about the dark web, If you don't have a reason to be on the dark web, then stay off of it. Obviously, I recommend understanding the technology. Get to know what a VPN is, understand how Tor and encryption all works, but only for the sake of knowledge and an understanding of security. I'm all about understanding technology and really getting to know the layers of the internet. But don't go looking for illegal or questionable content, because if you look, you will find it. That said, moving on to the story that I wanted to share. This happened several years ago, I would say early to mid-2000s at the latest. This was a time before the internet was this huge entity that everyone spent all of their time on, when broadband was like 10 Mbps at most, and Newgrounds was king of the internet. Back then, I was actually a contractor for web development. People and organizations that wanted to have their presence on the net would contact me, and I would discuss what they wanted, then build out websites for them. These weren't complex websites like what exists now. They were more like pages with static content and pictures, basically just, this is our company and what we do, kind of pages. It was a good paying gig. Back in the early 2000s, a lot of companies wanted their presence on the web, and I worked with a lot of local corporations. It's not super relevant, but it helps to 1. Let you know how old I am, and 2. Lets you know that I understand technology and how the web works. Back then, I was always on the web, looking into competitor sites and seeing what worked where, and pulling inspiration from things that already existed. At one point, I was talking to a buddy of mine, another tech person, and he brought up that I should consider looking at the dark web for some inspiration. At first, I was a bit confused. The only things I knew about the dark web was that it wasn't easy to get onto, and that it was where hackers and criminals hung out on the web. I asked him why he thought that I should be going to the dark web, and he made a point that I couldn't refute. He mentioned that I would probably be the only person in the area that built websites that had seen parts of the dark or deep web. Basically, he was saying that I would have a leg up on everyone because I would have an idea that they wouldn't have. I kind of agreed with him. So, after chatting with him, he convinced me, and I had him come over to set up my system for accessing the dark web. I got on and started just going through random sites and trying to avoid anything that could be illegal. And I found a neat site that worked like a wiki. I don't think it was actually the Deep Web Wiki or anything like that, but it was a collection of links very similar to it, and some of them worked. For the most part, they ended up just on dead ends, with nothing on the other side. But some of them were interesting forums and just pages with information about random things. I was happily clicking along when I came across a page that kind of looked like the original version of YouTube. If anyone has been around for a while, then you know what I mean. Old blocky page with the star ratings on the videos. What was weird to me was that a lot of the front page videos were just a black screen, and when I clicked on them, they had an overlay that said something along the lines of, "Video has expired." What was strange to me was that the titles of the videos were just single words. The first one I clicked on was titled, "Hang." There was another one that was called "Electric," and one called "Pain." Obviously, these were a bit ominous, and there wasn't much on the screen for the videos, just the title and the star rating. Hang had a 5-star rating, and it showed that it was rated 40 times, for instance. I was scrolling through the front page, and I finally found a video that didn't have a black box overlay. It was titled, Shoot. The thumbnail for the video was a guy literally sitting in a nearly empty room that was trashed. I clicked on the video, and it started up pretty quick. I don't know why, but part of me was sitting there and thinking that it was going to be a fairly normal video, that it was going to be some sort of vlog or something from a guy in the thumbnail. Instead, what I got was a video of a guy sitting in this dingy-looking room with a syringe in his hand, and as much as I wanted to click away, I just sat there and watched this video as it played out. As the video started, he was just sitting there and staring at the camera, and it looked like he nodded to someone behind the camera. After a second or two, the audio cut in, and I heard him say something like, "For $300, right?" And then a voice said yes. He nodded and glanced back to the camera and basically started saying his name and location. I don't remember where he was, but he said his name was Jeff, and that he was doing this for the site for an amount of money equal to $300, and that this video would serve as his contract. Then, he ended with, "And remember kids, don't do drugs." Then, after a second, he situated himself in the chair and tied off part of his arm. Then, he took the syringe and then shoved it into his arm. Long story short, he shot whatever was in that syringe, I want to assume it was heroin, into his arm, and he was doing this for money. My guess is that this site was set up for people to do things for the audience, and they would get paid for it. This was like some sort of dark web YouTube or Twitch for people to pay and watch what happened to people in certain situations. Watching this guy have a reaction to the drugs that he put in his arm was horrifying. He seriously collapsed on the floor and started convulsing. And I really don't want to remember the rest of it. I clicked off of it and went back to the main page. And at this point, the other videos became clear. Hang, electrical, pain. All of these were videos of people doing something to themselves for payment. The fact that Hang had a high rating didn't really bode well with me. And at this point, I could only imagine what happened on that video that got people to rate it 5 stars. After watching this guy drop to the floor from injecting again, I'm assuming heroin, I wasn't very curious on the website anymore. I closed the page and decided that I was done with all of that. And honestly, the sight of that guy and the thought of what the other videos most likely contained has seriously haunted me ever since.
Mr. Network. Sent in by Anonymous. My dark web story is one that actually happened recently. Within the last 4 to 5 months actually. And it's one of the most disturbing and sickening things that I've ever seen or experienced in my 32 years of being on this earth. There are some really sick people out there. And I want to say to those of you listening, stay off the dark web. Enjoy the stories told by those of us who are stupid enough to get involved in it. But don't get curious enough to drag yourself into the mud. Like most people, living in this quarantine has left me with an excessive amount of spare time on my hands. I'm still employed, thankfully, but I get to work from the comfort of my living room. I'm not going to name my employer or my job title for obvious security reasons, but I will say I'm pretty much the guy on the network team that gets to sit home and watch data traffic spikes for the company's applications and websites. To be honest, I probably have one of the easiest jobs out there. I have to watch a graph system, as it shows how much data our servers are pushing and receiving. And unless we get hit with a denial of service attack, there's not much to be done. If anything does happen, I have to get on the phone and talk with the other networking guys about what actions we want to take. Then have my weekly report call with my boss to tell her that everything is working as intended. We aren't a huge company, and we upgraded our servers at the end of last year, which was perfect timing. So there's honestly not a whole lot to do on the day-to-day. Based on what I just said, you can probably assume I know my way around a computer. I've worked in IT my whole career, and I like to believe I can hold my own out there. I know how networks run, I understand data routing, and I know a lot about data encryption and security. During the start of quarantine, I started studying more about data security and such, and ended up being interested in Tor, onion routing, and how the deep web and dark web differ from the surface web. If you really want some interesting reads, you should look into Mariana's Web. It's an interesting rabbit hole. As most technically adapted people do, I got both bored and curious about what existed out there in the deeper parts of the internet. I didn't want to do anything illegal, but part of me wanted to be familiar with what content and activities existed beyond the surface. I know this is stupid, but boredom and extra time can be a terrifying motivator when you kind of know what you were doing. I went through the process of setting up my personal system to get on the deep web, installed Tails, set up Tor, got a decent VPN after some vetting, did my security checks. I started going through some of the onion links that were easily accessible. For the most part, they were innocent sites that really didn't have anything crazy on them. I was simply pursuing the pages, not getting heavily involved. I found a lot of what you would expect to find: adult content, a few illegal shop sites, various conspiracy boards and other forums. Just some basic deep web content that didn't really stand out. Then I ended up on a page that I would never have expected to see on the deep web. A dating site. I say dating site, but based on the explanation of their service and some of the profiles, I think it was meant to be more like Tinder. One-night stand interactions with little or no commitment. What I found was that the dating page was set up in what I could only call categories, basically split into what you were looking for in a partner. It had categories for race, ethnicity, background, sexual preference, personal kinks, and even this section that was basically for sugar daddies. If you don't know what that is, I'm not going to explain it to you. One category under the personal kinks section made me curious, as it was something I wasn't sure about. It was called Chasers. I clicked on it and decided I would spend a few minutes looking through the profiles. What I ended up finding was nothing short of legitimately horrifying. The profile I clicked on was of a middle-aged guy. He was fairly attractive, and looked like he was someone who could do well on any of the other dating apps. I was reading through who he was, trying to figure out what the hell made him a chaser, when I got to the bottom of his profile. It read the following: I'm looking for anyone who can help me achieve my lifelong dream of being physical with an HIV-infected individual. This further section further outlined how it was a goal of his to catch the disease, and that he was willing to pay almost any amount to do this. I went to another profile, and it was a young man that explained he'd been infected with COVID, and that he'll be willing to give it to anyone that wanted it for the price of a nice dinner. The third profile I went to was looking for someone to hurt or severely injure them while being intimate. And I'm not even going to explain the specifics of what he wanted, but that person definitely needed to seek help. This entire category was of people looking to catch diseases, or give diseases to each other, and a few were looking to be injured. A lot of them were willing to pay for these services, saying it was a deep fantasy of theirs. I think the most disgusting one, besides the ones I had mentioned, was a man requesting to be with a woman who had terminal cancer. There's nothing inherently wrong with being with someone who has cancer. I have no issue with that. But he was treating it like a fetish, and listed in his profile that the sicker the better. Again, he listed he was willing to pay significant amounts of money, or even take care of medical costs for this. This cemented in my mind that there are some very, very disturbed people out there. I closed it and shut down my laptop. I won't say it was the last time I ever got on the deep web, but it definitely made me more careful about where I went, and less curious about what was out there.
I prank unsuspecting guests on the dark web for fun, and my last prank may cost me my life. Story by u/Andy Levy. Something happened to me a few weeks ago that I planned to keep secret, but recently it has been eating away at me, and I need to speak about it. The situation involves the dark web, but it isn't like all the other stories you hear of some unsuspecting soul learning of the dark web through a friend, going on it for the first time, and browsing around until they inevitably come across some horrifying page that leave them sleepless for nights. No, this is the opposite, to be honest. I'm actually the one who would be terrifying these curious souls. You see, I'm a dark web prankster, meaning I spend my free time on the dark web messing with unsuspecting strangers. I join chat rooms and send them links to gory but obviously fake videos, and I play similar videos in place of my webcam in private chats, tricking the other user into thinking that they are chatting with a psychopathic killer. My favorite trick, though, is taking control of their cursor, manipulating the chat room and making the site unclosable unless they turn off their machine. This one gets the most screams and appalled expressions, and it is all achieved through running some simple bash scripts. Now, some people may think this is cruel, but I see it as a service, a free one at that. You see, these people come onto the dark web for these kinds of experiences. They hear somebody tell a scary story of their experience on the big bad dark web, and they want to be able to tell similar stories in a sad attempt to be interesting. They come looking to be terrified, and I ensure that they aren't disappointed. Of course, I get my own enjoyment out of it. It's a win-win. But recently, this has all changed. If you fly too close to the sun, you will eventually be burned, and I am burning. The night started like any other. I got back from work, made some dinner, and after washing up, I logged onto my PC and got to work. I jumped around a few chat rooms, but they were unusually quiet or taking way too long to connect, and when they did connect, people left before I got a chance to mess with them. Eventually, I was able to keep someone around for more than a few seconds. They were some bald dude with a gnarly scar across their nose. His ears and face were both heavily pierced, and he had a python tattoo wrapped around his neck. A tough guy, and they were always fun to make cry like a baby. The way that I usually do these pranks is I keep the screen blank until I see the person, then I choose from the collection of cam clips that I have, and I slowly escalate it from there. For this specific instance, I chose a clip of a cute girl who starts by smiling and waving. The man smiled back and began typing until a message popped up. "Hi, you're cute." "Thank you, I like your tattoo." We went back and forth typing and discussing ourselves until I decided to start the fun. I took down the video of the girl and replaced it with a video that starts with a man tied to a chair. A masked man then begins to beat the man in the chair with a hammer, and to my surprise, the man didn't seem horrified. Instead, he began to wholeheartedly laugh before sending another message. "Funny, but I prefer the lady." I replied, telling him to shut up, or the girl will get it next. And once that message sent, the man's laughter stopped and he began to stare into the camera with a cold, emotionless gaze. "You shouldn't be so rude." That message was the beginning of the end of my pranking. He began to type again, and when he stopped, my jaw dropped and my fun was over. He sent the message, and it was my full name. I quickly moved my cursor up and tried to X out of the chat, but my cursor froze before dissipating before my very eyes. I opened my console and began to frantically type some commands, but each one was denied. Slowly, the chat began to turn black with the red font, and I was in a full-blown panic now. My heart was racing, and I felt like I had spikes sticking into my arms, legs, and neck, and I couldn't control my breathing, and I was sweating profusely. All the while, that psycho was smiling into the camera with his dirty yellow teeth glaring at me as he continued to type. "Let's have a look, shall we?" The light from my webcam lit up, and sure enough, down in the left-hand corner of the screen was my terrified face staring aimlessly at the screen. My brain was screaming instructions at me, but my body couldn't react. I was frozen in fear. Eventually, I snapped out of it and stood up to turn off my computer when he screamed in a deep, grisly, distorted voice. "Wait!" This stopped me in my tracks. I looked back at the screen, and he was gone, but only momentarily, and when he returned, he was standing up leaning over directly into the camera. He lifted his hand, balled in a fist and opened it, revealing multiple human teeth, which fell from his hand and bounced off the desk beneath. He then sent the last message. "See you soon, boy." He smiled as the words in the chat room began to fall off the screen while a loud screeching noise blared from my speaker. Just then, my computer switched itself off, leaving me standing staring at my reflection on the darkened monitor. I must have stood there for at least 5 minutes before I snapped out of it and then went to bed. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time that I closed my eyes, I saw his horrifying smile, and I heard the disgusting sound of the teeth hitting the desk. I called in sick to work the next day so that I could try to relax, and I went for a run to clear my head. It helped enormously, and 3 days later, I had put the whole experience behind me. However, a week ago, about 10 days after the incident, something happened which has made me tell this story. At about 1 a.m., I was awoken by some strange banging sounds. I got up in a haze and looked out the front window to see an old maroon-colored Toyota Camry parked right behind my car, blocking it in. The banging had stopped, but the strange car had put me on edge. I had lived in this neighborhood for a few years, and I have never once saw this car. I put on some clothes and began to walk down my stairs and towards the front door. But as I did, the banging began again. It was coming from the back door, and I slowly walked towards the door, with my heart racing. The closer I got, the louder the bangs. Whatever was causing it was trying to smash the door off its hinges. I wanted to scream, "Get the hell away from my house!" However, for once in my life, I made the smart decision and ran up my stairs and got into my bedroom before barricading my door and calling 911. The operator picked up just as I heard a window smash from downstairs. "There's a man in my house! He's trying to kill me!" I screamed before she responded, telling me to calm down and to tell her my location. She asked me to stay on the line and that a squad car was close by. I heard heavy footsteps stomping up my stairs and towards my door before stopping. The operator asked, was I still there, but before I could answer her inquiry, the man started to attempt to knock down my bedroom door, and the bangs on the door were deafening. The operator kept pushing me to respond, but I couldn't. I was transfixed on the door, and how with every sickening thud, that psycho got closer and closer. And suddenly, I could hear sirens in the distance, and the banging stopped, followed by the sound of quick steps speeding down the stairs. And shortly after, the sound of a car starting and speeding away. A few minutes later, the lights from the sirens illuminated my room, and this broke me out of my frozen, fearful state, and I moved the barricade and ran down my stairs and out the front door to the police. They questioned me for some time and searched around my house. They found shoe and axe marks on both doors, and my bedroom door had a massive hole in it from where the lunatic was cutting it. I gave them my full statement and told them everything. When all was finished, they drove me to my friend's house as I couldn't stay at mine anymore. The next day I rang my landlord and canceled my tenancy, which cost me my deposit and cancellation fee. And I've been staying with my friend while I look for a new place. I haven't been sleeping at all, and I'm terrified that that psycho will find me again. The police found no evidence that could be used to find him and bar the camera, but there are thousands of them in that state alone. I fear for my life every day, and I'm unsure if I'll ever be safe again. So, stay off the dark web. It is mostly used by jokesters, but it only takes one wrong click to put your life in danger. The dark web is a place where you can buy damn near anything for the right amount of Bitcoin. From things like the obvious, drugs, hacking tools, personal information on people you want to stalk, all the way to things that are much more obscure. Things like exotic pets, hitman services, though most of those are honeypots, and illegally obtained weapons. Most of the time, when thinking about buying things on the dark web, it's best not to think too much on what you're looking at. Take it at face value and don't ask questions. You don't want to know where the hell those guys got the block of drugs or the handgun that you just purchased, because odds are, when you get to the end of that rabbit hole, you're going to find that someone is either dead, injured, missing, or being looked for by federal agents. My point is, you really don't need to be on the dark web unless you plan to break the law in some way, shape, or form. That said, there is one service that I found on the dark web that actually made me think about it and what could have or could be happening. For a bit of backstory, I spend a lot of my personal time on the internet. I do a lot of contractor IT work for larger companies, mostly data security and security analysis for medium-sized corporations. One of my secondary jobs in my cybersecurity work is what's known as threat hunting. A threat hunter is someone that goes out onto the deep and dark web and tries to find pages that are selling vulnerability information for websites or technologies. Basically, they go and see if a company's information is available to hackers or if they're using technologies that are being actively exploited. This doesn't have anything to do with my story, but it gives you an idea of who I am and what I do for a living, and it helps to explain why I was out on the dark web. Now, because I had to find this data on the dark web, typically information that was for sale, I had to get in with the people selling the info and had to purchase it when necessary. They were legitimate sales on the dark web. Yes, this is a gray area, and yes, there can be issues with doing this, but a lot of the time, it was critical for what I was doing for these organizations. Because of this, I spent a lot of time on sites that were built to sell illegal content. And this ties back to how I started this story. The site that sells illegal content, items, and services. Typically, you see these things and you just understand that they exist and move on. However, there was one site that had something that made me legitimately terrified, mostly because it had two services that were sickeningly tied together. The first service that I saw was one that was unfortunately fairly common, which is escorts. A lot of the time, these escorts on the dark web are not willing participants. They are, more often than not, victims of human trafficking. That alone is sickening and terrible. But the next part made it worse. The website had a service dedicated to assisting immigrants. On its face, that may not sound like much, but put it into context with the other side of that. It's incredibly likely that a lot of these immigrants that they were helping were dragged into the human trafficking side as well. Think about it. People entering a foreign country, possibly alone and desperate, most likely not able to keep in touch with their family back home. And it's likely that no one knows where they're going to end up. I just kind of sat there and thought about it for a few moments, and it really got to me. The thoughts that someone from another country that may be looking to get away from an oppressive government or away from something like the cartel could end up finding its way out. I could imagine they would do so much to scrape together the money just to pay these people that say that would help them, and then they end up being trafficked and sold out as an escort. I know, this isn't your normal story, and I apologize if it's a bit strange in context, but it's something that I found on the dark web that actually scared me. And while it was really on an implication and not confirmation, it's one of those things that, when you know how these illegal networks work, it becomes clear what's happening.
Please stay away from the dark web. Posted by u/anti1venom11. Just some insight about me. I'm a 19-year-old male with a decent body build from Florida. I live in a rural area where my house is surrounded by trees, and it's a long way from here to the bus stop. I usually jog on my way there and take the bus to my university because I didn't have enough to afford housing there. I was late to class by about 5 minutes. I took my seat, started to prepare my notes, and listened to the professor. I was opening a book when I heard a group of students talking about how there is some horrible stuff on the internet and that one had ordered some weed and LSD. I was interested in what they were talking about, but not about the weed, about how there is other stuff that cannot be found with your typical search engine. Just as class was about to end, I heard one of them saying how his buddy should download the search engine called Tor. His friend complied, said they'd meet later and that they have other classes to attend. They parted ways and I was entirely intrigued about this Tor browser. I finally finished my classes for the day and started to head home. I had to take my usual route, jog to the bus stop, take the bus to the closest station to my house, and I jogged the rest of the way back. I entered my house and ran to my room, curious on what they were talking about. I turned on my computer and directly searched Tor browser and installed it. Before I went on it, I did some research about it and if it was best if I installed a VPN to keep my IP hidden. I also stumbled upon how that is where the deep web lies, and that is a place that no one should visit. My curiosity got the best of me and decided to proceed. I turned on the VPN, launched Tor, and found some links. I went to each of them. They were the typical drugstore, government secrets, and your average firearms dealer. But that's when I opened the link, which led me to a blank site. There was nothing in the page until the words popped up. If you are not familiar with this site, leave. If you were led here, please proceed. And the buttons, leave and proceed, popped up on the screen. I thought to myself, what could go wrong? And curiosity once again got the best of me. I clicked on proceed and a small chat box popped up. There was a single admin and about 11 other viewers. I decided not to type, wait, and watch what this was all about. Just as I looked away, a video popped up. It was a man whose arms and legs were nailed all the way through to keep him in place. There was blood pouring from the places he was nailed. I felt a bit sick and thought that this was just a cleverly edited video. The man's face was completely blank. Suddenly, a door in the background opened slowly. What popped up was a man with a mask that left me speechless. It was the exact same face of the guy nailed to the chair. Expressionless. Blank. I felt sick and decided to leave, but the exit button was nowhere to be found. These freaks disabled my close button. Then, what I saw next in the chat made my stomach drop. Wanting to leave so soon? I thought to myself, how did he know I wanted to leave? He posted a picture of me in the chat. I immediately threatened to call the cops, and that was the worst decision of my life. He then threatened to come over to my house and kidnap me, or that he would slit my throat if I tried to resist. He then proceeded to type my full name, address, where I'm studying, and where my other family members live. The chat then told the man in the mask to show me what he would do to me if he came to my house. He started to run his knife through the helpless man's neck and began to remove body parts, just like a butcher cutting up some meat. I quickly removed the power cable of the computer, took it out, and destroyed the computer so he couldn't reach me. I thought to myself, how on earth was he able to find my name and where I live if I had a VPN on? I then felt a buzz in my pocket. My phone was ringing. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and saw a blank caller ID. I immediately hung up, and what came next was gut-wrenching. He sent me a text saying, "You're next," and I thought this was just some bull. I keep a 9mm handgun concealed in my house, just in case of robbery. I couldn't sleep through the night, thinking that someone was watching me, ready to make their move. Luckily, I fell asleep and nothing much happened that night. I woke up, did my typical routine, and headed to university. I always lock all my doors and windows in my house, and I don't usually forget to do so. It was just a regular day. I took all my classes and heard those other boys from yesterday saying the stuff they did in the deep web. I went home exhausted since I barely got any sleep because of what happened last night. Walking to the doorstep, I felt that something was off, but decided to shrug it off. I tried unlocking the door, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I realized it. The door wouldn't unlock because it was already unlocked. I shrugged it off, thinking I just forgot to lock it since I didn't get any sleep last night. I walked in, then locked the door behind me. I felt like someone was watching me. You know when you can feel someone stare? Yeah, that's exactly what I felt. I go around the house, looking in closets, corners, you name it, but nothing was there. I thought to myself that it was just due to a lack of sleep. I go to take a quick shower and head to bed. Once I doze off, I was awoken 6 hours later to the sound of a crack and a bump. It came from the bathroom. I was thinking it could be the weirdo from the deep web. But I thought to myself, no way, I locked all the doors and windows. If someone opened a door or a window, I would have instantly woken up since they are loud and I'm a light sleeper. I went to check on it and it was written on the mirror, large, capital letters, with a deep red color. It had the texture of that like blood. It said, "Look outside." I immediately looked outside my window and saw a large, dark figure standing by a tree. That's when it hit me. 2 other shadowy figures popped up from another tree. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 as fast as I can, while running down making sure every door was locked. I looked outside again when I saw another 4 dark figures popping up from the trees. There was a total of 7 men outside, hiding within the trees. The 911 operator finally picked up and asked what my emergency was. This is how it went. 911, what's your emergency? Get the cops over. There are 7 men outside my house, walking closer every second. What's so suspicious of these men? They are freaking holding butcher knives. Okay, what's your address? 1428 Elm Street. I stumbled in the house, running like a maniac, remembering that I kept my 9mm concealed inside. I go, grab the gun, and I hear an extremely loud bang outside my door. I go look through the peephole, and it was just one of them. He shouted with his deep voice, "Open up!" I told him that I had already called the cops and that I was armed. That's when I lost all hope of security and safety. I heard 6 windows being smashed and the men jumping through, making a loud thud after hopping in. I instantly thought that my best chance of survival was to run to the bathroom and lock myself in. I heard the men slowly walking up the stairs, making a creaking sound after every step. That's when it all went down. I thought that if I were to go, I wouldn't go without a fight. I start screaming once more that I was armed, and if they came through the door, I would open fire. That's when relief struck me like a rock. I saw the blue and red lights outside the bathroom window, with their sirens blasting as loud as it could. The men instantly ran downstairs and jumped out of the window they had broke in, running straight for the woods behind the house. The police saw the men running into the woods and sent a couple of officers with canines chasing the men. The rest came in the house, looking for me, concerned for my safety. Luckily, I was still alive, just a few scratches and bruises from clumsily running around my house, looking for a stop to increase my chance of survival. After that, the cops offered me a place to stay in some crappy motel, just so I wouldn't have to stay in my house. Immediately after that day, I got rid of all my belongings and moved out of state. I now live in California, basically a new life, I would say. I have never had to go through that again, and I've never saw those men or anyone stalking me since I left Florida. So, to those dark web chat room freaks, I hope we never meet again.
I have a story that actually got me off the deep and dark web altogether. I actually didn't know much about everything. I was aware of what Tor was, all the encryption stuff and whatnot, but I really wasn't very well versed in what exactly made the deep and dark web different from the surface web. Well, I knew the dark web was illegal stuff, but I was curious how it was able to exist, how things worked, why the cops hadn't taken it down, and so forth and so on. It was a bit of a weird, ignorant view of things, but as time went on and I educated myself, I started to understand how encryption and anonymity worked. And fortunately, as I learned, I found myself feeling more confident. I started out as just looking around at things. Then I started commenting on forums. Then, I moved on to actually communicating with the people instead of just making mindless comments. I kind of felt at home in a few of the communities, and it was nice to kind of live amongst a bunch of people all over the world and just talk about random things that had no real bearing on everyday life. It was almost my escape from reality, which isn't something that a lot of people can say. Well, as I quickly learned, the deep web isn't all rainbows and unicorns. Actually, I don't think it's rainbows and unicorns at all. I just got in with decent people. And as I was pursuing my usual forum, I found a post by someone that I had spoken with a few times, and I thought they were pretty cool. The forum post said something to the effect of, "Message me for an invite to the Red Friday party." I was all about parties, and again, I was comfortable with these people, so I figured it would be a good time just hanging out online with some anonymous people from the internet, chatting about nothing in particular. But what I got, however, was not a party. Now, I'm sure you can see where this is going. I can hear you probably thinking, "But OP, red rooms don't really exist." And I can tell that, while they don't really exist as an easy-to-access node on the dark web, at least one does exist, and it's shared very privately. This Red Friday party was set up to look like a basic live stream, a camera, some dimmed-out red lights, and a girl that was in front of the camera. She looked fairly normal. She didn't look upset or terrified or anything, and she was reading chat pretty nonchalantly. At first, I thought this was going to be one of those just chatting streams or whatever. People were asking her questions about herself, and she would answer shyly. Most of the questions were pretty normal, and a few were a bit sexual and direct, but she would avoid them. And after watching her just describe her everyday life for a few minutes, I noticed a timer on the top of the screen that was counting down and was a couple minutes away from 0. I waited for it to count down, and when it did, there was a ringing noise and a guy's voice came on from off screen. He said something to the effect of, "All right, chat time is up. Now, we will go into donation request only. Get your coins ready, because it's going to be a blast." I could see the look on her face shift from shy to straight up nervous. She said something like, "I don't want to do this." And the other voice very firmly and loudly said, "You stole from me, and these guys are going to pay your debt. You do what they say until we're square, or things are going to go south really fast." You know the saying, it's like a train wreck and you can't look away. That's how this was with me. I wanted to close this out and never think about it ever again. But part of me just had to watch. The whole thing started mundane. People donated small amounts of Bitcoin for stupid things. Put a shoe on your head, show us your feet, try to lick your elbow. Honestly, stupid stuff. And it wasn't that bad for the first few minutes. But then the higher amount started to pour in for other things. They were telling her to take her clothes off, do other things that I won't mention, and she was visibly distraught the whole time, but she complied. And as bad as that was, I didn't expect the next part. One person chimed in with 2 Bitcoin, which was a lot of money at that time, and told her to cut her cheek with a knife. She shook her head no and said that she couldn't do that, but the man chimed in again, said to do it, and handed her a small pocket knife. She started to sob and quickly sliced her cheek, causing herself to bleed. Then there was another donation for several more Bitcoin that said, "Cut a finger off." She was already sobbing at this point and yelling no, saying that she was done and that she wanted to leave. He started yelling, grabbed her hand, and did it for her. This was mortifying, obviously, but the last part got worse. There were people donating dozens of Bitcoin to the stream, and the things they wanted were sick. Then one chimed in with a 50 Bitcoin donation that said, "I'm bored. Get rid of her." This was then matched by a number of other people donating similar amounts and echoing the exact same sentiment. I just sat there for a moment, watching her scream and cry, begging for her life, and then watching a man walk into the scene of the camera with what looked like a machete. I did not continue watching, and I will say that the thought of all of this made me physically ill. I literally threw up in the trash can by my desk. That was seriously the worst thing that I have ever seen, and it completely made me swear off anything beyond the surface web. Hell, since then, I've been nearly scared to use a computer and do anything beyond use Facebook or surf the front page of Reddit. I have no idea if what I saw was real, or a pre-recorded snuff like horror movie, or if it was a legit Red Room style party. I don't know if the chat was real or pre-recorded, but part of me tells me that she was being held hostage and what I saw actually happened. While Red Rooms may not really be a big thing, something akin to them does exist, and I highly recommend never ever go to a dark web live stream just in case. I have a fairly short story about a personal experience that I had on the dark web. And honestly, it's actually more so a weird story than it is creepy. There's absolutely a creepy aspect to it, no doubt about that, but for the most part, it was pretty much just one of those things that you look at, get a bit curious about, and then move on with your life from there. Well, that's what I did anyway. So obviously, I'm a deep web user. I like to hit up a bunch of random pages that exist out there. Some are pretty tame. Some of them could probably coexist alongside pages like Facebook and Reddit. But I also like to spend some of my time on sites that a lot of people would consider to be detestable, or some other adjective like that. No, I don't really spend time on illegal or gross or any content like that, but I like what I like, and really, it's just a few pages that may be morally in a gray area. And no, I'm not going to name the pages. I'm just going to say that I'm an adult and I can do what I want. Let's just leave it at that. I'm trying to over-justify this and I shouldn't. One of the pages that I like to go on is a bit of a marketplace where you can buy odds and ends and the occasional oddity. There have been a lot of things that I wanted to spend money on, but then couldn't justify. Things like vials of blood from certain celebrities that are into Scientology, various bootleg DVDs of early cuts of movies, and there was even a book one time that was supposedly signed by Charles Manson. But it was a certain book that I wouldn't be caught dead owning. So, as cool as having Manson's signature would be to me, I just kind of moved on and accepted that it was something that I would never own. Now, as most of you know, there's a certain niche on the dark web for illegal items. Things like the aforementioned bootleg DVDs, stolen movie scripts, drugs of course. And there is a lot that you can buy on the dark web that you really shouldn't. One thing you don't usually expect to find, accessories, like personal accessories. There was one page on the market that I found that sold things like wallets, shoes, watches, and they even had what they stated to be exotic leathers available. My curiosity definitely got its grip on me, and I started looking through their wares, and I was shocked at what they claimed to have. The first thing I saw was a ton of leather made of alligator skin. Not terribly crazy, there's certainly a market that exists on the surface for it. Then, I clicked through and they claimed to have camel leather shoes available, which I thought was cool, but again, not terribly weird if you live in a place where camels are common. Then, I saw the weird stuff. Cat leather watches, dog leather wallets. It actually started to make me feel a bit disgusted thinking of someone's pet being turned into an accessory. Then, I saw dolphin leather, and that, I'm pretty sure, is illegal to use. And then finally, there was a small section on the store dedicated to human leather. You heard that right. Leather made of human skin. They promised it was durable and that it was well worth the extra money it cost to source it. There was even a customization section where you could choose the ethnicity of the product if you wanted to change it up. Again, my imagination kind of took over and I started thinking about who the hell was buying the stuff. But with the process they would have to go through, with the amount of money they were charging, there had to be a market, right? Anyways, like I said, that was my story, and I know it was weirder than creepy. It's pretty sickening that it exists, and honestly, I think I'll stick with my crappy leather and Velcro wallet. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.